Everybody, we apologize for the bit of a late start. Good evening, everybody. We're starting late, but we would like to get started. Adila, if you can go ahead and do a roll call.
Mendoza? Here. Hilpern?
Here.
Tanya Booty?
Here.
Hernandez?
Here.
Lindsay Ryan?
Here.
Cartha?
Here. So our first item is a public hearing on the 2019-20 tentative budget. At this time, we will open the floor for the public hearing on the 2019-20 District 65 and Park School budgets pursuant to Illinois School Code. Tentative budgets for Evanston-Skokie School District 65 and for the joint agreement for the operation of Park School were presented to the board on August 20th, 2019, and were on display for more than 30 days. A notice published in the local media announced that the board would hold this hearing. If there is anyone in the audience who wishes to address the board regarding the tentative budgets, they are asked to step to the podium at this time. This will then complete the public hearing. So then we will move on. Rebecca, you have the approval of the meeting agenda?
Yes, I move that the Board of Education approve tonight's meeting agenda as presented.
Second.
Mendoza?
Yes.
Hilpern?
Yes.
Tanya Booty?
Yes.
Hernandez?
Yes.
Lindsay Ryan?
Yes.
Cartha?
Yes. And then we have around 65 district recognitions and board comments. Is there anything?
Good evening. I have a few updates I'd like to share for the around 65 portion of the meeting. I'd first of all like to have Kelly Klein, if you would please share some of your remarks about the 5 essentials survey.
Thank you. I would like to take a moment to thank and acknowledge our school leaders and our families for all of their efforts this past year to increase parent participation in the 5 Essentials survey. We had a meaningful and remarkable increase in parent participation, and I really want to thank and laud all of our families for taking the time to share their perspectives on their schools with their school communities. We saw participation rates go up at 13 of our schools. Several schools had really significant increases, some going from 3% to 36%, another going from 19% to 41%. As a result, we have 7 schools who will be receiving parent survey reports this year that didn't receive the reports in the prior year. This is a huge accomplishment that comes directly from the efforts of our school leaders and our families. And I want to thank them for doing that work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kylie. Also, we'd like to promote that next week we have the week of October 7 is LGBTQ week, and we'd like to celebrate that throughout the District of 65. Efforts are supported in partnership by the District Administration and the District 65 Educators Council, DEC. Students and educators will engage in a week-long curriculum that celebrates and affirms the LGBTQ identities with the goal of fostering a deeper sense of allyship within our schools and the creation of a welcoming and inclusive environment for all. We're also very appreciative of the District 65 educators and the members of the District Gender and Sexuality Educators Alliance for the many hours they spent this summer on developing a robust, thoughtful, and age-appropriate curriculum for use in our school district. More information will be shared in a letter that will be going out to the community tomorrow. We also want to take this opportunity to remind everyone that the March school improvement date change has been made from Wednesday, March 4 to Wednesday, March 16. We're also communicating that through letters, text messages, social media, newsletters, and we'll be sharing this information at the parent-teacher conferences as well. We would like to thank our colleagues at Evanston Township High School for making this opportunity possible at no cost to our school district. Lastly, I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize and thank our educators, our administrators, and our support staff who have warmly welcomed Heidi and I to the district. Over the past month, we've had the great opportunity to visit many of the schools and to see firsthand the level of care and dedication and commitment our staff has made to not just students, but also their families as well. This is truly a remarkable community, and we are so happy to be here and to support all the great work that is going on with that. We also thank the board for your support and allowing us to also last week to participate in the Beyond Diversity training as well. Very much with that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any board comments?
Yep, I have one. So I wanted to wish everybody a happy Hispanic Heritage Month, two half months. So from September 15th to October 15th, we celebrate nationally our heritage and the contributions that we've made to this country. I also do want to thank the families and the students that helped support the climate strike on the 20th, on Friday. It was a really incredible showcase of community unity and really our students taking the lead. So thank you to all that participated in the strike. I do also want to invite community members, families, friends to our very first wellness walk, which will take place October 5th at Dawes, at James Park behind Dawes Elementary. It's from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. If there are any community members that would be interested in holding a booth, coming to help out and volunteer, please feel free to email. You can email me right now because the Wellness Committee doesn't have an email address, and I'd be happy to provide you more information on that. And I know there will probably be some more information on the PEP week that we have going on. I just wanted to encourage families to hashtag PEP Equity when you are out eating and dining. And I would also like to encourage any families that might see people at some of these restaurants. It's a great opportunity to get to know other families. So if you see maybe a couple of seats that are open at a table or at a restaurant that you might be at, I think it's a great opportunity to introduce yourselves to one another. That's all I have.
I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the historic nature of the discussion that we have before us this evening as we apply the Racial Equity Impact Assessment tool to the Superintendent Leadership Profile. This is anti-racist racial equity policy at work. As a community, we have made a commitment to take institutional responsibility for the impact of a history of racially exclusionary policies and practices, and through diligent self-reflection, consider how we can go beyond being simply not racist to anti-racist. We are choosing to consider intentionally how one of our most important responsibilities as a board, hiring a permanent superintendent, does not unintentionally replicate exclusion of marginalized voices and experiences, and in turn replicate unsustainable ways of being as a community. To be in community with one another requires that we commit to repair institutional harms. One way to do that is to invite the influence on our decisions and invite influence on our decisions and culture of work. We as a board have committed to doing that with this process and have committed time and resources to that intention. I am so grateful to the hundreds of people that gave of their time to complete the survey and attend focus groups, parents, staff, community members alike. Thank you. Thank you to BWP for providing this unprecedented data that we requested. Thank you, board colleagues, for your bravery, your commitment to justice, and for your thoughtful review. I look forward to our discussion, and I hope that we set an example locally and beyond about how to elevate and learn from the gift that is the voices of marginalized populations. We appreciate you, and we are thankful for you.
Any other? Are there any other comments? I do just want to take a quick moment, as Rebecca had already mentioned. It is the PTA Equity Project's Restaurant Week this week, so just briefly, hopefully most of you know about the work of the PTA Equity Project, which has been working for a number of years. It's a collaborative work with PTAs across the district to try to address fundraising disparities, and so this is the second year in a row that we are doing Restaurant Week to support the committee's work, and it's just a delicious way to support equity in our district. So I encourage you, if you can, to to visit one of the many diverse restaurants that are participating this year, and all the social media hashtags and whatnot that other people can guide you to better than I can. But please participate and mention and thank the restaurants for supporting the PTA Equity Project. With that, we will move on to public comments. Members of the public are welcome and invited to address the Board of Education during open public meetings. Speakers are discouraged from using the public comment period to air concerns about or voice personal attacks against specific district employees, being mindful that the public comment period is not a suitable forum for fact-finding or resolution of disputes. Rather, we strongly encourage members of the public who have concerns about specific district employees to communicate with us following district communication guidelines available in our student handbook. Please remember as you come up to the podium to state your name and that you have 3 minutes to address the board, and then we'll have a timer go off when the 3 minutes are up. So our first speaker is Marie Cabilla.
Hi, good evening. My name is Marika Villa. I'm a District 65 parent. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, so Spanish is my first language and that of my children. Both of them have attended the TUI program at Willard. Along with some other very determined women in District 65 Green Teams, I've been working for the past 3 years to advocate for environmental efforts and literacy in the district, period. You may wonder what a sustainable district looks like. It looks like a district that has a climate justice curriculum from kindergarten to 12th grade, along with workshops for our educators that teach us why the earth is warming and how this affects humans and the environment around them, and what we can do to prevent or mitigate it. Such a district has a culture that models respect and conservation of resources at every level, from reducing our amount of waste in school supply purchasing to considering the environmental impacts of the fundraisers we hold, to limiting food waste in the lunchroom. During the day, I'm a physician with an interest in environmental health. The effects of the environment on health and equity are a fact. Air pollution, which leads to increased asthma attacks, preterm labor, and increased cardiovascular risk, is felt more in communities with higher concentrations of vehicles and air particles, such as those that are closer to factories or waste stations like the one in our 5th Ward. Conditions such as asthma, diabetes, and cancer are seen more often in disadvantaged communities. Equity cannot be addressed without addressing the environment. As we gather input to guide the search for our next superintendent, we must take into account the important links between equity and environmental sustainability. A move towards equity certainly involves closing the achievement gap, but we should think beyond that. Academic achievement is only a short-term goal to achieving equity. In order for disadvantaged communities to thrive, we need to give students the tools to succeed, not only on tests, but also to be healthy individuals who know that caring for the environment is good for their own health and that of the people around them. When we protect our air and water quality, it is the disadvantaged communities who will benefit first. When we teach all our students to reduce consumption, we conserve resources, but also teach important principles for financial responsibility. When we teach about and ensure access to healthy, unprocessed foods, we're all doing a good for the environment, but we're also ensuring that that child grows up to be a healthy individual with decreased risk of chronic conditions like diabetes. When we talk about global warming, increasing the number of days of extreme heat, and discuss heat stroke, this lesson is most relevant to the child that may have a challenging commute to school. When kids are taught the impact of pesticides on health and the environment and to learn how to reduce their exposure, this may be most helpful for kids who may have family members who work around these chemicals. Equity is impossible without considering environmental justice and the effects of environment and health. The City of Evanston is a leader in environmental stewardship, and we cannot expect anything less from this school district. We owe our children a superintendent who is aware of the urgency of climate action and knows that environmental literacy is a subject that our children will not be able to afford ignoring. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Alice Berry.
Hi, I'm Alice Berry. I'm on the board of Opal. We have concerns about the survey that was sent out. So I simply want to restate what Opal believes the board's priorities should be in choosing a superintendent. By far the most important issue and challenge facing the district is eliminating the Black student achievement gap. Evanston often congratulates itself on diversity, but we believe these numbers tell the real story. On MAP reading benchmarks, the gap between Black and white students is 50.2%. In MAP math benchmarks, the gap is 58.5%. In science proficiency, the gap is 48%. A Black student is 9 times more likely than a white student to score in the lowest quartile in reading, 10 times more likely in math. Opal believes that what we need most in a superintendent are 2 things: a demonstrated commitment to racial equity and understanding of its impact on academic achievement and discipline patterns, and to be a strong leader who holds all subordinates accountable. The district consistently fails to recruit, hire, and retain a proportionate number of Black educators, despite research showing the academic boost that Black students get from having Black teachers. As shown in state report cards, this needle hasn't moved in years. Hasn't moved significantly, I should say. 0 teachers were fired or replaced on remediation for a period of 5 years ending last June. That's information we got from a FOIA request. And MAP scores in both math and reading have fallen district-wide since 2015. Please consider these factors in assessing and choosing a new superintendent. Thank you.
Next is Roger Williams. Roger Williams.
Greetings, District 65 Board and administrators. My name is Roger Williams. I'm the president of Opal. And we have just wanted to voice some concerns about the actual process as in the terms of search for a new superintendent. Some of the things that came to our mind was, for number one, there was only one community meeting, which was for about a 1 hour long. That's for people in the community to come and share what their concerns were. Secondly, the focus groups were held at times that many people could not attend because they had work commitments. And finally, we had some concerns about the validity of the survey on which the leadership profile is based. The key, the one that really jumps out at me and several other people for that matter, is failure to capture the IP address of online survey respondents. Now what this means is it enables surveys to be submitted more than once from the same computer. We like to laugh and talk about how in Chicago people could vote more than one time. Well, and so what I'm getting at in this, it is unknown how many unique individuals actually participated in on this survey. Secondly, the survey was inconsistent regarding the 100-character limit on responses. At least 64 answers longer than the 100 characters appear in full in the profile. Respondents who stopped at 100 characters were penalized for stopping. Finally, the survey didn't warn that 3 answers were required for several questions, so that it took multiple attempts to submit. It's unknown how many people gave up without submitting. I just wanted to bring these to your attention. While the process is very, very useful, it's not flawless. That's my point. But the bottom line is what what Alice Berry just mentioned. Our concern is that one of the primary focus would be to eliminate the Black student achievement gap, and to choose someone who shows a demonstrated commitment to racial equity. Thank you.
Next, Jenny Heckathorn.
Members of the school board, superintendent, administrators, friends, and allies, my name is Jennifer Heckathorn. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm a veteran teacher of District 65, a 26-year resident of the town of Evanston, a mother, and an ally. I try my best to be an ally for all marginalized people. I clearly don't understand all I need to, but I'm continuing on my journey. This evening, I'm here to talk about. Okay, somebody want to read this? Thank you.
This evening, I'm here to talk about the blatant illegal harassment that is continuing to happen at Park School over the gender identity of a teacher. 3 years ago, a paraprofessional at Park School harassed a staff member due to their gender identity. This person was bringing religion into the workplace, telling the trans individual they should be going to hell. They openly prayed in the classroom, including with the students, to save this teacher. The paraprofessional received a several-month-long paid leave while the case was being investigated. During the investigation, a top administrator in our district questioned whether it was safe for this teacher to be with children, especially in the task of changing diapers. The administrator was clearly speaking from their own ignorance and bias. After the long investigation, I was told the paraprofessional would be moved to a different school for her comfort. As far as I know, there was nothing said to the teacher regarding their own safety, and there was nothing put on the paraprofessional's record as a warning to future employers. There was nothing put in place at Park School to protect the teacher from ongoing harassment. Last year, a member of our own administration was found guilty of breaching the confidentiality of the same teacher. It appeared they found the teacher's story interesting or strange. This administrator was heard talking on the phone during a district meeting and using the teacher's name and confidential information and using derogatory language. This case was founded against the administrator. The consequences for this administrator was to be quietly removed from a committee that the teacher was on. The committee, by the way, was one directly tied to this administrator's main job description. There was no apology, no transparency district-wide as to why this administrator was suddenly pulled off the committee. This year, year 3 in this abuse and harassment, a person on the staff at Park School directly told the teacher they would not use their correct pronouns and would not use their name for in-school correspondence. They used hateful and sarcastic words when they spoke to this teacher, saying they just didn't get it and would not comply. This case was founded in favor of the victim. Several days later, a paraprofessional at Park School interrupted the teacher while working with students to announce that a group of paraprofessionals were uncomfortable working in the same building as them and would be having a meeting. The paraprofessional asked if the teacher would like to attend, as they talked about what to do about this teacher and their gender identity. This harassment has been going on for 3 years. Each time an issue comes up, the district tries, as quietly as it can, to isolate the teacher they see as the problem rather than exacting some meaningful, appropriate consequences for the offenders. The teacher who is being harassed has spoken with their principals, HR, the director of equity, the past superintendent, and the teachers union. It is past time for this harassment to be known throughout the district and the community. This is profoundly affecting this individual teacher as well as their colleagues and especially their students. This continues to have serious implications for our entire community. My purpose in bringing this to the public is to challenge our district to make a stand to protect the LGBT community. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. Sophie Leventhal.
My name is Sophie Leventhal. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am speaking on the topic of LGBTQ staff and student protection and inclusion. I am an educator in this district and one of the members of the district's Gender and Sexuality Support Team. First, I'd like to thank the board and administration for making LGBTQ equity a priority this year. With HRC statistics indicating that 70% of youth report being bullied and 3 in 10 students have received physical threats due to their identity, this work is imperative. Due to the statistics like this, the Gender Support Team was developed last school year with the intention of implementing Administrative Policy 710 with fidelity. The policy is intended to help schools ensure safe learning environments free of discrimination and bullying, and to promote the educational and social integration of transgender and gender-expansive students. Current members of the team include 2 members of GSEA, a social worker, 2 building-level administrators, and the head of health services. The committee was led by the previous Assistant Superintendent of Special Services, who has since retired. The Gender Support Team spent most of last year's entirety writing a protective staff policy independently from professional consultation. Since the retirement of the previous chair, the team has not been able to function without an identified administrative lead. As we move forward, I would like to express some concern regarding the committee being led by the Assistant Superintendent of Special Services, as stated in the policy. As a gay special educator, I fear this message is being sent, the message being sent is stigmatizing to students identifying or possibly struggling with being LGBTQ+. According to Board Policy 710, each building will identify a school coordinator to serve on the Gender Support Team and oversee inclusion for our transgender and gender-expansive students. Coordinators serve as a point of contact for students, parents, guardians, and staff. The school coordinators are also supposed to be attending the Gender Support Team meetings and collaborating on the fidelity of the individual student support plans. According to the policy, the Gender Support Team and the school coordinator shall meet within 10 business days of the request to develop or revise a support plan. It is my hope that the administrative team would consider the establishment of procedures outlined in the board policies, such as identifying the school coordinators, clearly outlining the training timeline referred to in the policy, and considering placement of the Gender Support Team under the Director of Equity. By creating these procedures, we can create consistent expectations within the district and are then able to hold ourselves accountable to ensure safety and inclusion for so many of our students and staff identifying as LGBTQ+. I'd like to thank the members of the board and community for hearing my statement.
Chelsea Alsberg.
Hello. My son Quentin Alsberg is a student at Park School. Last week his teacher was not at school. For students such as ours who have ASD and other comorbid conditions, routine and people who understand them are key to their behavioral well-being. Quentin has limited verbal abilities, but he can show us when he's upset with interrupted sleep and classic meltdowns, as occurred last week. There was no communication from Park School regarding the reason for this absence. Concern for his teacher led us to reach out to a third party who knows them. We were told that his teacher had not been at school because they'd been horribly harassed for their gender identity. My husband and I are saddened and outraged this is occurring. Our child can't tell us if someone is not treating him well. We need to trust the adults around him. If we can't trust adults to be decent human beings to our colleagues, how can we trust them to care for our most vulnerable students? We did not want Quentin to park this year. We removed him after attending park in 2017-18 due to the negative attitude of staff members and learning he had been restrained without our permission. We were promised that the environment had changed and there was a new principal and a new attitude. We only agreed to the placement after Quentin met Ren Heckathorn and their positive attitude and care for our special child was clear. This needs to be fixed. Ren Heckathorn needs to be safe. Quentin and children like him need to be safe. Ren and Quentin need to be together. If PARK can't be fixed, then the CDC program needs to be expanded for others on the autism spectrum, and teachers need to be given a classroom in another building away from this insular ignorance that the segregated system seems to have. Our district constantly talks diversity and social emotional well-being. These words need to be actions. Thank you.
Katie Chalmers. Katie Chalmers.
Hi, my name is Katie. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am speaking on the topic of LGBTQ staff and student protection. Today I'm speaking as an ally. I would like to share an email on behalf of a District 65 staff member and a parent who could not attend tonight's meeting. Good evening, school board, district administration, and community members. I am sorry that I am not able to be here in person, yet I'm so grateful that this letter can be read and be another voice added to the conversation. My name is Lisa Levine, and I am a 17-year employee of the district and parent of twins in 5th grade in the district. I often wear both hats when speaking about our schools, and tonight is no different. I implore you to consider the necessity of gender and sexuality diversity among our teaching and administrative teams. I know last week as an employee, I received an email from the Human Resources Department that reminded us of the importance to support our fellow staff members who identify as LGBTQ+, and cited the board policies that obligate us to do so. Truthfully, I felt that that email was condescending and missed the mark for a few reasons. Number one, policy is absolutely critical and important. However, the reality is that having real-life experiences with team members and parents who can safely and proudly identify as LGBTQ+ is also necessary to help people widen their beliefs, and this policy email felt ineffective in changing the beliefs that necessitated the need for policy in the first place. Number two, the email referenced the Lurie's training as a way for us to learn to support our fellow LGBTQ+ staff, and I am so grateful that the district has hired Lurie's to facilitate trainings for staff district-wide. However, after participating in the training last week, I do not feel that that was the purpose of the training, which brings me to my next point. The training Lurie's provided brought me to tears at times. As I experienced it, it centered around our responsibilities as educators and how to make our schools and classrooms more welcoming and inclusive for students and their families. I am raising a daughter who is gender nonconforming. I am beyond grateful that the staff at her school will receive the same information and training so that they can continue to help her realize her full potential and be able to offer authentically safe spaces and support her as she navigates her gender identity. Additionally, I know that a fellow educator has been speaking up since October 2016 about harassment that they have been experienced because of their gender identity. I know that the school in which they work and the district has had ample opportunity to remedy the situation and has failed to do so to the point that this talented and highly specialized educator no longer feels safe to return to work. This is hurtful for this individual and also hurtful for the community in which they work. As a parent raising a gender-expansive child in our district, this is hurtful to the entire District 65 community. Just as I strongly believe our kids of color need to see teachers and people in authority that look like them, I believe that our LGBTQ youth should be able to see themselves reflected in the adults with whom they interact with at school. Intentionally building this diverse and thriving workforce is also critical to our white students and colleagues as we continue to explore the impact of whiteness and work to become allies, creating more welcoming spaces. And so I join in asking for parents, community members, and those who believe that our school should be free of harassment and that teachers, like students, should feel safe at school to join us in taking a stand and demand that District 65 take immediate action to protect its employees as well as students from gender-based discrimination and harassment. I appreciate having the time to share my thoughts. Have a good evening and thank you. And I would like to thank the members of the board and community for hearing this statement. Thank you so much.
Kira Chalmers.
Hi, my name is Kira and I'm an ETHS graduate. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm speaking on the topic of LGBTQ+ staff and student protection. Today, I am speaking as a member of the LGBTQ community. I and the next 4 allies will be sharing complaints that were filed by a District 65 staff member to illuminate the degree to which staff has been left unprotected in District 65. On February 10th, 2017, a formal grievance was filed with Human Resources for workplace harassment under School Board Policy 520. This complaint was filed after a District 65 classroom teacher had undergone months of harassment by another District 65 employee, who, among other remarks, greeted the classroom teacher daily by stating, "I just want to remind you that you will be going to hell." Following the grievance, a meeting was scheduled between the 2 staff members and a building administrator. During the meeting, the employee made the following discriminatory remarks. "They" is not a real pronoun. "A person like them shouldn't be working with children." Lastly, the employee used the word transvestite to describe the District 65 staff member. The building administrator made no attempt to address these slurs, and the meeting was ended by the complainant. The 2 staff members were sent back to the same classroom to work alongside each other for the rest of the day. After an investigation from Human Resources, it was determined that the formal grievance was unfounded. When asked for a reason why the complaint was unfounded, it was said that the employee was not entitled to that information. It is important to note that all of the discrimination listed under this grievance took place before any LGBTQ staff training was made available to the district employees and/or administrators involved, including the staff member who conducted the investigation. For this reason, I feel that it is important that the district hire a consultant to finish the staff policy protections with the inclusion of gender identity. Furthermore, it is time to ensure that all staff undergo adequate trainings focused on staff-to-staff discrimination. This request is in direct alignment with number 3 on the district equity statement, ensuring that all board members and staff examine and change educational practices, policies, and processes that contribute to and perpetuate racial disparities and the disparities of those who have been marginalized in society by their identity, culture, or economic status. I would like to thank the members of the board and community for hearing my statements tonight.
Jess? Jess?
Hi, my name is Jessica Manning, and I'm a District 65 employee. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am speaking on the topic of LGBTQ+ staff and student protection. Tonight, I will be sharing a complaint that was filed by a District 65 staff member. On April 1st, 2019, a second formal grievance was filed by the same District 65 classroom teacher as a violation of Article 6A, Section A of the DEC Collective Bargaining Agreement under Teacher Protection. It also violated Board Policy 5130 under Responsibilities Concerning Internal Information. In short, there was an irresponsible breach of confidentiality and oversharing of personal information by a district admin. In the complaint, it was documented that a district admin was speaking on the phone during a meeting in front of other District 65 colleagues. The meeting happened on March 6th, and the classroom teacher was not in attendance. The administrator made discriminatory remarks regarding the classroom teacher's gender identity. When asked to step out to take the phone call, the administrator chose not to and remained in the meeting. Two meeting attendees who found the marks inappropriate reported the incident to the superintendent. The classroom teacher was informed that there had been a breach of confidentiality on March 6th via email. It was advised that the classroom teacher file a formal grievance regarding the incident after more detail regarding the incident had been disclosed in a private meeting with administration. The grievance was founded on April 30th after an investigation conducted by Human Resources. The complainant was not informed of the consequences per grievance confidentiality policy. The classroom teacher was informed that appropriate action was taken. The concern is that it cannot be confirmed that appropriate action was taken given the lack of staff protection and training in District 65. It is also important to point out that there is no clear policy to hold administrators accountable for the way that LGBTQ+ staff is treated within the district. Therefore, there is no way to ensure that appropriate action has been taken to prevent such incidents from occurring again. For this reason, I feel that it is important that the district hire a consultant to finish the staff policy protections with the inclusion of gender identity. Furthermore, it is time to ensure that all staff undergo adequate trainings focused on staff-to-staff discrimination. This request is in direct alignment with number 3 on district equity statement, ensuring that all board members and staff examine and change educational practices, policies, and processes that contribute to and perpetuate racial disparities and the disparities of those who have been marginalized in society by their identity, cultural, or economic status. I would like to thank the members of the board and community for hearing my statement.
Marcos Soto.
Hi, excuse me. My name is Marcos. My pronouns are he, him, his, they, them, theirs, and I'm speaking on the topic of LGBTQ+ staff and student protection. Today I'm speaking as an ally. I will be sharing a complaint that was filed by a District 65 staff member. The following complaint was communicated via email on August 22, 2019 by the same District 65 classroom teacher. Included on the email were administrators, union leadership, and human resources. The goal of the email was to problem solve regarding discrimination happening between staff members within a District 65 building. On August 22nd, a District 65 staff member refused to change the name on a classroom teacher's mailbox and outgoing emails. The staff member refused, stating that they are tired of all the names and pronouns, and that they will only refer to staff by the name that is on their birth certificate or a legal document. The staff member required that the legal paperwork be submitted to HR. This procedure does match the past and current practice reflected in the same building regarding cisgender name tags. For example, a cisgender employee with the name Francis may choose to be called Frank, and that preferred name is validated and reflected in email communication and labeling. A meeting was scheduled between HR, the involved staff member, and the building administrator. After the meeting, the classroom teacher was approached by the staff member who reaffirmed that it was not their job to keep up with the teachers' faces and that they only go off birth certificates. After this interaction, it was determined that the two employees were not allowed to speak to one another, which greatly interfered with both staff members' jobs and affected student care and learning. Eventually, the conflict was resolved with the staff member being removed from the building without any further information given. This incident shows a clear need for consistent policy across buildings and adequate staff training. When untrained staff are left to interpret their job description without clear protections being in place, we are leaving our diverse workforce susceptible to these types of discrimination while also compromising the job security of others. In this case, the classroom teacher was experiencing harassment and the staff member was removed from the building. In situations like this, nobody wins. For this reason, I feel like it is important that the district hire a consultant to finish staff policy protections with inclusion of gender identity. Furthermore, it is time to ensure that all staff undergo adequate trainings focused on staff-to-staff discrimination. This request is in direct alignment with number 3 of the district equity statement, ensuring that all board members and staff examine and change educational practices, policies, and processes that contribute to and perpetuate racial disparities, and the disparities of those who have been marginalized in society by their identity, culture, or economic status. I would like to thank the members of the board and community for hearing my statement. Thank you.
Ashley Stanley.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, they, them, theirs. I'm speaking on the topic of LGBTQ+ staff and student protection. Today, I am speaking as an ally and a member of the LGBTQ community, and as a member of the Gender and Sexuality Educator Alliance. I will be sharing a complaint that was filed by a District 65 staff member. On September 5th, 2019, the following complaint was taken to a building administrator. While working with students on the playground, a District 65 staff member approached the same classroom teacher, informing them that many other staff members were not comfortable with the classroom teacher being in the building. They told the teacher that there is a planned paraprofessional union meeting to address this discomfort with the classroom teacher's gender identity. This meeting was solely unique to the building and was not endorsed by the union. The incident was reported to the district building administrator, who then texted the information to a district administrator. On September 5th, the classroom teacher sent an email disclosing that they no longer felt protected and safe to report to work. The email was sent to building administration, district administration, and union leadership. The district has yet to provide a safe environment for the teacher to report back to. This situation shows a clear lack of protection from one of our staff members and a lack of support for all involved in problem-solving these conflicts. This teacher, who I feel I should point out is a District 65 graduate, has been repeatedly discriminated against and has faced severe harassment and regularly occurring microaggressions during school hours and in front of students. These incidents, along with others that have not been addressed at tonight's meeting, are in conflict with board policy, union collective bargaining agreements, and district equity statement number 3, ensuring that all board members and staff examine and change educational practices, policies, and processes that contribute to and perpetuate racial disparities and the disparities of people who have been marginalized in society by their identity, cultural, or economic status. It is also in violation of number 6, attracting and retaining a diverse workforce that is diverse in skills and experience and reflects the demographic and diversity of our students. When we leave one of our own staff unprotected, we are all susceptible to discrimination. It is time to implement and enforce a policy that will not just benefit those most vulnerable, but all District 65 staff and students. For this reason, I feel that it is important that the district hire a consultant to finish staff protection policy with the inclusion of gender identity. Furthermore, it is time to ensure that all staff undergo adequate trainings focused on staff-to-staff discrimination. I would like to thank the members of the board and the community for hearing my statement.
Ren Heckathorn.
Hello, my name is Ren, and my pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am speaking as a transgender special education teacher here in District 65, and I happen to be that classroom teacher that has been spoken about. As I write this, I can't help but wonder if you really care about me and how I feel. It is truly terrifying to be emotionally vulnerable in a space that has never protected me, a space that has allowed me to get hurt time and time again, a space that has suggested that maybe I am the one people need to be protected from. The last 3 years have brought me a level of pain I never thought I would have to experience, especially not at my place of work. When I came out at work in October of 2016, I knew it was quite possible that some people would not be willing or able to support me. Sadly, as a trans person, I know all too well that losing people when you show people who you truly are is a part of the process. Losing people was something I was prepared for. Being treated like I was some sort of monster was not something I had readied my heart for. Do you know what is worse than being told you're going to hell, that you shouldn't be around children, and that you make people uncomfortable, and that you can't safely change students' diapers all because you're transgender? Being left completely on my own. Being shown time and time again that my life was not worth protecting. I tried tirelessly to work with this district to create a space where people like me are safe and protected. I attended meetings, joined committees, contacted outside consultants, and continue to give people the benefit of the doubt. I would tell myself, maybe this is the best they can do right now. Maybe I'm the first trans person they've ever met. Maybe this is really new to them. I am done giving people the benefit of the doubt. I am done being the one doing all the work and holding this district's hand as they fumble and fall and refuse to stand up for what is right. I will no longer accept that this is the best you can do. If I'm the first trans person you've ever met, it's nice to meet you. If this is really new, that's okay, but refusing to learn is not acceptable. I am out and proud of who I am. I will not use a name that doesn't feel quite right just because it's the one you're used to. I will not use pronouns that are all wrong just because they are comfortable for you. You will not silence me. You will not scare me away. I am here to stay, and maybe one day you will show me the love, support, and protection I deserve. I wonder if you see all this as my issue, that this is that issue that Ren won't stop talking about. Well, guess what? This is not my issue. This is your issue, and this is the issue of cisgender straight people. You are my district leaders, and you are supposed to protect me. Ocean Vuong said in his first novel, "Sometimes you are erased before you are given the choice of stating who you are." This is what you are doing. You are erasing people before they even have a chance to share with you their truths. You are sending the message that this is not a district for transgender teachers, and by doing that, you are sending a message that this is not a district for transgender students. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Thank you for allowing me this space tonight. It is time to do better.
Thank you. Our next speaker, Hal Sprague.
Good evening. My name is Hal Sprague. I'm president of Citizens Greener Evanston, and I'd like to address the leadership profile for the superintendent with respect to climate change. There's no greater threat to our community and the lives of our children and their children than climate change. While it's difficult sometimes to see today the direct impact of climate change, it's a force with such momentum that we have to take action now while we can do something about it. Citizens Greener Evanston is the lead organization that's helping the city with implementing CARP, the Climate Action and Resilience Plan, and I'm going to assume that you're familiar with the plan that was adopted by the City Council last December to address climate change. It involves changing in behavior with respect to our use of energy, water, our behavior with transportation, our handling of food and waste and other things by everybody in the community, In order to achieve the goal, the central goal of CARP, which is to be carbon neutral by 2050, we have to involve our children. We have to educate them and give them a role in CARP implementation, because it's critical to their future, and because in the not distant future they will be adults and they'll be making decisions about how this will all be handled. And therefore, it's essential that we have a district superintendent who is knowledgeable and experienced in climate action strategies, is an effective spokesperson for the strategies and individual behavior, and will not only help educate the students and the teachers, but to make it a priority for each school's superintendent and, principal and their administrations in the process. Thank you very much.
Paul Barker. Paul Barker.
My name is Paul Barker, and I want to reinforce what Roger Williams had to say about the survey. I feel like it was unfortunate and sort of poorly conceived. Having been a teacher long ago in a galaxy far away, I realized that the multiple choice questions were created to make it easier to score the thing. But that was an inappropriate use of it, I think. Open-ended essay questions would have been better. The limiting number of characters and that sort of thing must have made it very difficult to interpret. I got so frustrated with it, I didn't fill it out. I finally just turned it into scrap paper because the back sides of my printer were blank. I thought that if I were in your position, I would know how to interpret the return of information. It was very confusing. And I thought a little unfair to the people who were trying to stick to 100 characters, which is, I've never been a tweeter, but I understand it's the biggest frustration for Donald Trump, and may it be so forever. I want to say something else about climate change that, since I have a few minutes, I'd like to also jump on the bandwagon with that. What's at stake, according to some trees I spoke to several years back, redwoods, when I was walking through a redwood grove in California, I have since found out that trees actually do communicate with each other using the network of mycelium that mushrooms create. They can send chemical signals to one another. And there's a really good article on it in National Geographic, or you can go online and look it up. It's fascinating. But what I heard from the trees was pretty chilling. It said to me, or they said to me, it's not the loss of species that is so dangerous to Earth. As soon as you stop dumping carbon into the atmosphere, we're going to be okay. But you may not be. What's at stake is the survival of your species. And then the rest of them can breathe a lot easier. Unless you change your behavior and change it now, you're due to be extinct. And that was pretty chilling, because at the time nobody was talking about our own extinction. But as soon as we're out of the way, the planet will recover and it'll be just fine. And then some other species will have to adopt language and critical thinking and that sort of thing. So I was scared, and I remain scared. Timing was perfect. Thank you.
Jessica Manning. Oh, okay, thank you. Wendy Yano.
Good evening. My name is Wendy Yano. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am here tonight to support an anti-racist equity approach to the superintendent search. But I want to first acknowledge all the many comments about the need for an LGBTQI+ equity as well. While I no longer have children in District 65, both of my sons are in their 20s, I am an educator, an adult educator, so I have a front seat to what happens when our education systems don't offer equitable, in every way, K-12 education. My own experience here began around 2002 when my oldest son was in 3rd or 4th grade at Oakton Elementary School. I couldn't help but notice that in all the pull-out groups for reading, the groups were always almost entirely white. Maybe one African-American student, and it was almost always the same student. I would ask about this. I would suggest that it wasn't statistically possible. In a school where the student body was more than 70% African-American, how could only one black student be advanced enough to be in the pull-out group? I would hear something to the effect, well, these are the students who tested in the more advanced level, so they need the challenge. I wondered then, as I do now, what assumptions were being held about those students in the advanced challenges they needed. Now you might say, well, that was 15 plus years ago. Things have changed. I know they have changed, I'm sure they have changed, but here are some statistics we were presented with today. Only 32% of black students met or exceeded MAP reading benchmarks. I would argue that any change that has taken place has not sufficiently benefited African American students. We need a superintendent who understands equity broadly, deeply, and as the leadership forward with an anti-racist equity policy and practices while simultaneously supporting our teachers and communities as both groups grapple with the impact racism has had on our schools. I know that District 65 teachers are deeply involved in learning about the impact of systemic racism on our schools, and I applaud them, each and every one of them, for the hard work they're doing. But our students of color don't have time to wait until everyone learns that lesson. We need an experienced superintendent who understands the ways in which race impacts our educational experiences and has success in disrupting the negative impact on students of color, in particular black students in high-achieving, diverse schools. We need a superintendent who understands that racism is endemic, someone who deeply understands how that fact impacts the way in which we teach and the way our students learn. Thank you.
Renee Campbell.
What's the time?
3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Rena Campbell. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And again, I want to just acknowledge all of the powerful statements that were made before me. I think there's no coincidence that here in our district school meetings and at the city council meetings, there's much talk about going beyond courageous conversations on systemic racism and really moving towards taking action to dismantle it. I think we are taking the steps, and education is at the foundation of righting some of the wrongs. Please do not veer from the right path. You know the data. We need to be aware of it in order to measure our success. But I caution you to find a superintendent who is not so adept at looking at numbers that they fail to see the humanity in their students, family, and staff. I know we need assessments to make sure we're making progress, but I beg you to have a visionary leader who's not so attached to the tests, but can use an equity lens to find new ways to assess student achievement that aren't based in culturally biased written exams that have predictable outcomes for different races. As Ibram X. Kendi said recently at ETHS, if the tests are broken, why are we trying to fix the kids? Trying to interpret what kids know via algorithms are as limiting as a survey for the superintendent search. Please, give careful consideration, listen to your community, and please, let's find a superintendent who can both collaborate with the people and also measure success, but in new ways. Thank you.
Hallie and Effie.
Hello, my name is Callie Stoller. I'm a junior at Evanston Township, a part of the Illinois Climate Strike team and the E-Town Climate Action. I also helped organize the climate strike that happened this Friday. I'm here today because there is a threat to our air, our water, and the climate. And because this fight is ours, we have been forced to take action, to use our voices, because in 11 years, the damage we have done to our earth will be irreversible. I was never taught about the threat of climate change in school, and I am not the only one. Children's futures are at risk, and they don't even have the privilege of being informed about it. District 65 must create and implement climate action plans that include climate literacy, a comprehensive waste reduction plan, improved energy efficiency, and a plan to transition to renewable energy. The next superintendent must make this a priority. I cannot stress how important this is. We cannot give up. This is our home. This is the only planet we get. In the words of Greta Thunberg, I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic and act as if the house was on fire. This is the most important issue of our generation because it affects everyone. We are destroying our own home along with everyone in it. 50 years from now, I want to be standing here with my own children, celebrating our victory for the climate, for our planet, and for ourselves. Thank you.
My name is Effie Jacobson. I'm a senior at ETHS, and I also helped organize the Evanston Climate Strike on Friday. The next superintendent of District 65 must be climate literate. Climate literacy in District 65 means a holistic curriculum that teaches students a foundation of knowledge of climate change that will help them address the critical issues they will face. This means learning the science of climate change, how human behavior contributes to it, and what we can do to build our resilience. In addition to teaching and training students to be leaders on the topic of climate change, I urge the next superintendent of District 65 to revamp its operations so that school buildings become climate role models for the rest of the Evanston community. Thank you.
Mark Baer. Mark Baer.
My name is Mark Baer, and I just had issues with communication. I'm not sure if it's just at Haven or if it's in the district in general. Last year, there was an issue at Haven regarding a threat, possible threat to students. Parents were not notified until 36 hours later. They did not get a choice of whether to send their student to school or not. This year, I read in the police blotter 1 week ago that there had been a theft at Haven, that someone's locker had been broken into and cell phone and other items were stolen. So I wrote the principal and vice principal, assistant principal, thinking that they'd be sending out an email. They never did. The assistant principal responded saying that they're looking into the matter, and if anything is I guess appropriate, they will be notifying people. It's now a week later. I had just assumed that evening I'd be receiving an email saying there was a report of a theft at the junior high today, and we are looking into it just to reassure parents we're doing everything to keep the place safe, but there is nothing like that. So I'm very disappointed in that. I'm hoping the board will take action, if this is not the policy of the board, to let parents know our students go to the school, and we want to know when there's theft or any type of crime at our schools within a timely manner. Thank you very much.
Sylvia Wooler.
My name is Sylvia Wooler. I am one of the leaders of the District 65 Green Team, and I'm reading a statement on behalf of Bella Hubbard, who's a senior at ETHS. So, I'm a senior at ETHS and a graduate of Washington and Nichols. I've been worried about the earth dying for as long as I can remember, and now I am relieved to be part of a team that is working to save it. On Friday, I was part of a climate strike walk out from ETHS. An estimated 450 people turned up in Fountain Square to show support. I told my classmates, and I'm telling you, our schools fail to teach us about the issue that is going to impact our lives most. We demand that Evanston's school district teach us about climate crisis and show us that they care about our futures by transitioning to renewable energy. You can and you must start by hiring a superintendent who is climate literate, who understands this as the issue of our generation. This summer, I was trained in Minneapolis by Al Gore as a climate reality leader. Yes, I had to take a road trip and give up my summer weekend to get the education I need and deserve. It was there that I learned about climate justice. The climate crisis is an equity issue. I realized that whatever fear I had from my middle-class white self was nothing compared to so many people dying of extreme heat and storms, struggling to get water and food to survive, and suffering from diseases caused by this crisis. I learned that Illinois has more coal-fired power plants in communities of color than any other state, and that in the US, Black kids are 10 times more likely to die of asthma than white kids. Let that sink in. I learned that at my training that the people who are causing the climate emergency are not the same people who are suffering the consequences. Nations and individuals with more resources put more carbon into the atmosphere. Hurricane Dorian and Hurricane Maria are dramatic examples of environmental racism. These and similar storms, fires, heat waves, and droughts throughout Africa, Latin America, Asia have brought death and destruction to thousands of people of color. We know that if these places were predominantly white, the response and reporting would be different. Here in Evanston, we don't experience such brutal climate disasters, but if we do have more days of extreme heat, extreme cold, and flooding than when my mom grew up here. And we know that these effects have greater impact on our low-income neighbors who may not have the air conditioning or health insurance, or for whom losing a day's work because of the polar vortex has real financial and child care consequences. Through my training, I realized that it is my responsibility as a white girl with so much handed to her to do everything in my power to protect the planet, the wildlife, the people who can't fight. And I'm starting with you, District 65. If you care about our future, hire a climate-conscious superintendent, implement comprehensive climate justice curriculum, create and follow a climate action plan that transitions us to net zero emissions, and get educated about this issue. There's a climate reality presentation on Thursday at 7 p.m. at Washington School, and we can do one here upon request. Thank you.
Heather Sweeney. Heather Sweeney.
Hello, my name is Heather Sweeney. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I appreciate and stand behind so many of the things that were said tonight around gender identity and climate justice. But I wanted to talk about the superintendent search. As a parent in the district, I appreciated the opportunity to contribute to the superintendent profile. I wanted to underscore the importance that superintendent candidates possess a solid understanding of equity, and particularly racial equity. We know in our district that the biggest gaps and opportunities to achieve are along racial lines. We also know that when we see gaps like these that negatively impact one group, in this case students of color, that it's the policies that need fixing, not the children. In the words of Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, blame the policies, not the people. The students in our district deserve a superintendent who understands racial equity policymaking. A superintendent who understands racial equity policymaking will help to ensure that all students' experiences in District 65 are uplifting and will set students on the path to exceed their potential. Thank you.
Harry Shepard.
Good evening, board, administrators. My name's Terry Shepard, and I'm chair of the Education Committee of the North Shore branch of the NAACP. Before I begin my comments, I'd like to share with you the charge of the Education Committee. The NAACP works to ensure that all disadvantaged students and students of color are on the path to college or a successful career by ensuring access to great teaching, equitable resources, and a challenging curriculum. We are dedicated to eliminating the severe racial inequities that continue to plague our education system. Our ultimate goal is that every student of color receives a quality public education that prepares him or her to be a contributing member of a democracy. To achieve these goals, the Education Committee of the National Board, in concert with education chairs and leaders from across the association, have settled upon a four-pronged strategy to improve educational achievement for disadvantaged students. 1, increasing resource equity, target funds to neediest kids, ensuring college and career readiness, a path to success after graduation for all students, and improving teaching, growing our own great teachers now in underserved communities, and improving discipline, eliminate zero tolerance, keep kids in school. I would first like to thank those 120 Black parents and residents who responded to the survey. Their willingness to participate in the process is commendable. As education chair and Evanston resident, I participated in 2 focus groups held by BWP on September 12th to create the profile in the search for the next superintendent of District 65. I reviewed BWP's profile report, specifically pages 2 through 4, listing the district's strength, challenges, and characteristics and skill set, and Appendix F disaggregated the data of Black participants. Based upon my participation in the process and the review of the data, the NAACP proposes some changes to the general proposed profile to better reflect Black needs and perspectives. 1, the district strengths. We propose the district strengths not only be referred to as equity, but as specifically racial equity. 2, under weaknesses and challenges, we take umbrage with the description of the need for greater rigor for Black and brown students. This implies a deficit in how hard Black and brown students are working as the cause of the gap in opportunity to achieve, while we believe the gap is the responsibility of systemic exclusion. We propose that language be reframed as an opportunity gap. 1 more. 3, regarding desired superintendent qualities, we noticed that in the general profile, commitment to community and a level of racial consciousness were not included. We propose that be added. Thank you very much.
Meg Crewley.
Good evening. My name is Meg Crewley, and I'm the president of the District 65 Educators Council, representing over 750 educators in our district. I'm a cisgender, white female, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. This year, DEC is excited to announce that over the summer, a group of fellow educators took on the task of writing a week-long, age-appropriate LGBTQ+ curriculum as a district-approved summer learning project. The idea was championed by the GSEA, a Gender and Sexuality Educator Alliance, made up of a diverse group of educators and unanimously supported by DEC. Just want to take a moment because many of them are here, so could we just give them a... This work comes during an important time in Illinois history. A few weeks ago, Governor Pritzker signed House Bill 246 into law, and as of July 1st, 2020, all Illinois public schools will be required to include LGBTQ+ history in their curriculum. We know that we have a diverse community in District 65. LGBTQ+ Equity Week seeks to level the academic disparities that have historically left these identities out of the curriculum and out of schools, including where LGBTQ+ identities intersect with historically marginalized racial identities. Since this week falls within Hispanic Heritage Month, another important celebration of identity that we would like to embed more deeply in all of our schools. We will be encouraging educators to make connections between LGBTQ+ and Latinx identities rather than seeing them as coexisting separately. As you already heard, it is the hope that LGBTQ+ Equity Week will foster a deeper sense of allyship within our school communities and ensure the inclusion of all families, staff, and students that walk through our doors. Thank you to the district leadership for partnering and supporting this important week of action that honors and affirms the diversity of our community. As educators, we believe that every student, family, and staff should feel safe and supported at school, no matter their sexual orientation or gender identity. This week highlights a step in that direction for our students and families. It is also equally important that we have the same policies to support our staff. I am aware that the board revised Policy 710 to include gender identity in May 2018, and we commend the board for adopting the revised policy. DEC asks that you go the next step. Do the same for staff. The board needs to ensure that the same treatment, policies, and procedures are in place for staff, just as the board did for students. We are asking the board to pledge to be inclusive and supportive of LGBTQ+ staff, just as we strive to be inclusive of our students and families who are members of the LGBTQ+ community. Currently, Board Policy 510 only refers to sex and sexual orientation. DEC is asking that the board policy be revised to include gender identity and not just sex and sexual orientation. We also request that an outside consultant who is an expert in LGBTQ+ issues assist with the creation of this policy. We believe that this revision is essential in being able to be truly inclusive of all LGBTQ+ staff. DEC supports each and every staff member and wants to ensure that they are accepted and allowed to be their authentic selves, including race, ethnicity, religion, national origin, sex, sexual orientation, age, citizenship, disability, and gender orientation. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for all of your thoughtful and heartfelt comments. Please know that we heard you. So thank you all for being here and for speaking. We will continue on with the next part of our agenda, the proposed action items. And Biz, if you could.
I move that the Board of Education accept the recommendations outlined in the attached group motion and approve the personnel appointments, leaves, and separation agreement, August 2019 board and committee meeting minutes, destruction of the July-August 2017 closed session audio recording, July 2019 list of bills, June 2019 treasurer's report and budget amendment, gift for Walker and Shute School, and the 2019-20 board planning calendar.
Second.
Mendoza? Yes. Milford?
Yes.
Tanya Booty?
Yes.
Hernandez?
Yes.
Lindsay Ryan?
Yes.
Bertha?
Yes. Joey, got the next.
I move that the Board of Education adopt the final 2019-2020 District 65 budgets, including aggregate expenses for the operation of Park School as presented.
Second.
Oh, do we have a presentation?
Yeah, we have a brief presentation of the final budget. Sorry, that's me.
As almost presented. Thank you.
Thank you. So tonight we have a brief presentation of the final budget. Changes to the tentative budget were presented at the last Finance Committee meeting on the 9th. Tonight I just want to remind everyone why we have to go through this process as a public entity. We are required to have a balanced budget adopted by the end of the first quarter, which ends September 30th. Here I would like to share some important facts about our finances. This is our 18th consecutive balanced budget with revenues exceeding expenditures by 5.5 million. Also, district received the highest financial recognition from Illinois State Board of Education for FY18. Last time the district had this recognition was over 10 years ago in fiscal year '08, so this is something definitely to be proud of. In the current budget, FY19-20 budget, revenues of $141 million. They are increasing 4% from last year actuals and 5% from last year's budget. Expenditures, $135 million approximately, are increasing by 6% over last year's actuals and 4% from last year's budget. And again, the surplus that we are projecting will not be spent, will be preserved and added to our reserves used to offset future budget deficits. So what has changed from the tentative budget? Our revenues increasing by approximately $182,000, primarily because of the change in the estimate of corporate property replacement tax. That's the tax that we receive from the state. We also had some small adjustment to other local revenues and federal aid. This pie chart represents our operating revenues, and you can see clearly that the district is relying on property taxes. Almost 80% of our revenues comes from local property taxes, which is the most stable revenue source for us. Approximately 10% comes from the state, and 7% comes from federal sources. Moving to the changes in expenditures. Expenditures are also increasing slightly by approximately $573,000. Most of these changes come from line of salaries. The district added 3.3 positions, classroom support positions, 0.3 teachers due to student needs and increased enrollment. There was also a small adjustment to benefits. And we also increased due to grant carryover expenditures, which are one-time expenditures, purchase services, and supplies, $105,000 and $169,000 respectively. There were also some decreases in capital outlay and other objects, which represents the net cost of Park School operations. This slide illustrates all the new positions added in FY20 budget, 18.75 FTEs. 10.8 FTEs were due to increased enrollment and student needs. 4 positions were added due to strategic priorities, and 3.95 positions were added due to grants and efficiencies. And I just want to point out that 4.95 of these positions were budget neutrals, meaning we had either shifted the funds or we had external grants pay for these positions. Another pie chart, this one illustrates operating expenditures. And you can see from this chart that district is spending almost 80% of its budget on staffing. Only 7% of our budget is spent on tangible items, meaning supplies, equipment, and 11% is spent on services. Probably the largest service that the district purchases is transportation service for our students. This table illustrates updated financial projections, and the long-term picture has not changed from what you saw in June and in August. We are still balanced through FY22, and that's the circle on the third line. That's the last projected surplus budget that we have. Again, a lot of this is based on assumptions, and assumptions change. For example, CPI beyond 2021, fiscal 21 is estimated. We're currently using CPI of 2.1 in the current budget. We know the CPI affecting the next year, 1.9. And again, the CPI is unknown for the subsequent years. Also, if you look in the corner of the table, we are projecting to still have referendum funds. We are projecting approximately 11.6 million, which will not be enough to cover the deficit budget. And using the reserves to cover deficit budgets is not a prudent practice. So we are hoping to preserve our funds and not use them at all to balance the budgets. Because if we are using our reserves, that means we are bringing deficit budgets to you. And again, by state law, we are required to bring balanced annual budgets without using our reserves. So we will be spending time this fall in the Finance Committee talking about efficiencies and possible budget reductions. We have to be proactive. We cannot wait until FY22 to reduce our budget. Some of these changes will have to be definitely discussed and even implemented in upcoming months and years. And that's really the culprit for why we are projected to lose our referendum reserves and begin deficit budgets. Even though we have a balanced budget, structural deficit exists. What is structural deficit? It's the difference, the gap between the red line and the blue line. The red line represents the rate of growth in our expenditures. As you can see clearly, it exceeds the rate of growth of revenues. The structural deficit is the difference, is the variance in the rate of growth. So even though we have a balanced budget, we have a structural deficit. This is not District 65 issue alone. Majority of the school districts in Illinois struggle with that because how education is funded in Illinois. We rely heavily on property taxes. If you remember that chart that I show with this huge a blue wedge showing property taxes, 80%, that portion of our revenues will be increasing by 2.1% only. But if you look at our salaries, if you look at our benefits, everything is increasing much more. Next year, we know the CPI, 1.9. We also know the cost of our labor contracts. And unfortunately, there is a discrepancy between those two. So, so that's really the reason behind structural deficit. This slide is to illustrate for you what's happening with our referendum reserves. The board requested that we track referendum reserves, and you can see from this that we are on track. We're actually doing better. Our budget had projected referendum reserves to be at 21.6 at the end of June. Because of additional federal revenues and because of underspent expenditures, it was actually 25.2. So we increased our reserves by 3.6 million. This chart illustrates the district's fund balance. We are doing much better in comparison to 3 years ago. We used to be at 19%. Now we are over 30%, which is great because bond rating agencies, good business practices require us to be above at least 25%, and that's what this yellow line represents. That is 25%. So with the green portion of the bar representing referendum reserves, and with the blue one, which represents other reserves, we are projected to still remain above 25% in fiscal year 25. Although there are a lot of uncertainties in the future, including some that I already mentioned, the CPI, definitely pension cost shift, which we have in our projections. We don't know what's going to happen with the property tax freeze. We've been hearing that it may be coupled with the progressive income tax that may be put into deal. Nobody really knows. But we are paying attention, and we are definitely following the news. We're talking to our peers, EdRed, so we want to be prepared just in case there is a tax freeze put in place, because basically that's going to mean no increase in our property taxes for several years. Also, evidence-based funding. It's new funding since FY17. We were promised the same level of funding, but we don't know what's going to happen with that as well. And this slide is our final slide, and it outlines the steps, filing the budget with the state, and then, again, future discussions about balancing budgets beyond FY23. So that's all we had.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, I think we can go ahead then and vote.
Mendoza?
Yes.
Hilpern?
Yes.
Tanya Moody?
Yes.
Hernandez?
Yes.
Lindsay Ryan?
Yes.
Cartha?
Yes. With that, we'll move on to the discussion of the superintendent's leadership profile, and I'll ask Dr. Hill and Dr. Nolan to join us on that discussion. As we transition over into this, I just want to first of all just thank all of the community members. We had between the survey, the focus groups, the community forums, we had over 1,000 people participating, which is significant for a district our size. And so thank you for everybody who engaged in the various activities. I also want to note that many people made note of, in our last question on the survey, when we asked how people heard about the survey, one of the answers did not reflect our district's and our board's commitment to inclusivity. One of the choices was my church. That was a mistake on our part, and that I will own that oversight, that I didn't catch that before we approved the survey to go out, and I apologize for that. That was a narrow word choice, and it was incorrect, and the people who pointed it out were correct to point it out. So I personally want to apologize to the community for not living the ideas of equity and inclusivity that we want to, and we will do better going forward. So my apologies for that.
We agree, we agree. We didn't catch that either, so thank you.
So, but with that, we will move on to the presentation.
Okay, again, my name is Dr. Deborah Hill, and
Dr. Ann Noland.
And our pronouns are she, her, and hers. I think that's an important part of the discussion. Essentially, we're going to share this PowerPoint, which gives you a summary of the community engagement activity and the profile report, and hopefully within the process of doing that, I will be able to respond without being defensive of some of the comments that were made with regards to questions about the process in the survey. So, yeah, we need that.
We need the clicker?
We need the clicker. Dr. Mark Friedman, who is our additional consultant, is not able to be with us tonight, but the profile report was put together by the three consultants, who I need to tell you have had many years of doing superintendent searches, of doing the survey and following the process. Okay, what am I not pushing? Okay. So I want to just quickly, and reading is fundamental, so I will not be reading the PowerPoint to you. I really don't like death by PowerPoint in terms of that, but I will be describing each of the bullets and adding some substantive information to it. So I want to talk a little bit about the purpose. Contrary to popular belief, the purpose of this survey was not to create a dissertation. The purpose of the survey was to get community input as vastly and as broadly as we could in order to help in the terms of the search, in terms of screening, and actually headhunting for the superintendent. We tried to gather this information through a multiple set of strategies, recognizing that no one strategy, just like you have differentiated instruction, no one strategy works for all. So we began with interviews with the Board of Education because it's their primary responsibility to select the superintendent. We did one-on-one interviews with the board members, mostly in person, some by phone. Every group was asked the same 4 questions, and I'll go back through that momentarily. The board members, we did not hold their feet to the fire to have them interview with us for an hour. The other groups, in order to provide equity and fairness, all groups had the same amount of time to respond to the 4 prompts. Those prompts were, what are the strengths of District 65? What are the challenges of District 65? What are the skill sets and characteristics that the new superintendent would need in order to be successful here? And what other information should the board have in order to look at and examine the candidates? Same questions for everyone. Same amount of time for every group, including the community forum. One of the other pieces is we had focus groups. The purpose of the focus groups were to gather community organizations and partners and leadership and have them come and speak on behalf of their constituent group. And if you do the math, you cannot possibly take the 48 groups that we had interviewed and just have evening meetings. We would still be meeting. So part of that is the assumption that the groups that are represented would send representatives who could come during the day as well. So we ran 12 hours of input in terms of the groups, and I think you'll be a little bit impressed with the statistics. The community forum was an opportunity for anyone in the community, whether they were a parent or community member, who wanted to come and voice their choice in an open meeting. The intent was not to deny anyone access, but one of the things we've learned is that we learn a lot when we listen to each other. And so consequently, in terms of both the focus groups and the community forum, the intent was to have us listen to one another, because I believe, as a member of this community, that we're closer together than we are apart. And some of this has to do with the fact that we don't listen. We have our own little silo group, and we often do not have an opportunity for exchange. The online survey was to provide both qualitative and quantitative data. So there's a question about forced choice. Well, anyone that knows when you try to do something statistical, if you don't have the numbers, then it doesn't do much good. One of the advantages of the online survey was the community members and respondents had an opportunity to go beyond the questions. There was an other. But as with anything, you have to have a certain set of limitations. And again, when I share the statistics, that may become more clear why there were 100 character limitations with regards to that. Many surveys don't offer you the option of other. And again, once we talk about the data, you'll see that. So finally, the presentation of these results is presented for board approval. We don't have any difficulty with wordsmithing. However, I did, looked at every single comment from every single individual and categorized it so that we could come up with common themes across the strengths, the challenges, and the skill sets, characteristics, as well as the other things that community members wanted the board to consider. Acknowledgements. Ms. Cartha and I spent lots of time talking back and forth, texting, emailing, in order to try to get it right. It would be wonderful if this were a perfect world, but it's not. So let us be realistic. I think it was a little bit more work, but part of that was the board's desire to walk the talk relative to their concern about marginalized groups and those who don't participate. So kudos to the board. for taking that extra step. Adila, again, board secretary, constantly changing, reworking emails and everything, in addition to her other work. Melissa, communication was the key. Everything that we gave to her to do or to tool with or to tinker with, she did, and she did it in an excellent manner. Manuel, district translator. The survey was translated was in English and translated into Spanish, and we needed to have a professional do that, and he stepped right in. In addition to being available for any of the focus groups or the community forum where translation might have been required. District 65 community leaders and the press. And let me tell you, with the District 65 community leaders, we had kind of two sets. One set that worked on helping us design the communication outlets and strategies that we could use in order to encourage those participants who typically don't participate. And I'm going to tell you a little personal story about that. I was in church on Sunday, the Sunday before the deadline. And the pastor, as a part of his announcements, announced, get out there and do the community survey. District 65 needs to hear from the parents. In addition to that, he included in the church bulletin the link to the survey. And so I think that we went above and beyond, and while we haven't, again, reached 100%, I believe that the outreach efforts that were suggested and proposed by those community members and were implemented by the board are to be commended. Let me tell you, done the last 5 or 6 searches hasn't been that way. And we're now using District 65 as a model for those communities who would like to try to reach out to those marginalized groups. Just did a presentation in Madison, Wisconsin, which is 7 times larger, more even that, than we are. And they were very interested in some of the strategies that we use. Press. Our press has been very, 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 very helpful. They've published, they've put some things in the newspaper, and accurately. That accuracy becomes very, very critical when we are talking about gathering information. So I really want to say hats off to our press. They followed us, they made announcements, they put it in the paper. Again, another one of those strategies. District 65 board, at our planning session, when we presented these other options, I challenged the board to get out there and get the work done, and you did that. You made those contacts. Administrators and staff, again, were challenged. Parents and students and community participants were challenged, and you did what you said you were going to do, which was get out there and spread the word about how you could be involved. So overall, I'm not sure that we should beat ourselves up when we start looking at some of the statistics, because as I listened to the presentation earlier about the number of people that we're getting to participate, it's a never-ending battle. It is something that we continue to work on, and I think that you're to be commended because you're focusing on trying to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to be at the table. And let me tell you, on a national level, that's not always the case. So let me talk a little bit about the statistics. We did interview all 7 board members. There were 48 constituent groups that we interviewed in one day. There were 186 focus group participants. So although there's a question about conducting the focus groups during the day, we had 186 people during the day. There were 855 survey responses. That's huge. That's huge in a district our size. Typically, you're looking at maybe 300, 400. And so again, I think those extra efforts really played out for us. 712 other qualitative comments from various sections of the survey. Again, these were only 100 characters. It was meant for respondents to be concise, but it was giving you an option of providing some additional information. Again, I read all 712 of those other comments. I read all of the comments that came from the focus groups. I read all of the survey responses and actually tallied what that looked like in terms of identifying strengths, challenges, characteristics, and other. 63% of the survey participants were white, and 37% were participants of color. Now, when you look at the report, you can break that down. But one of the things that was noticeable is that every group that you identified had some representation. There was no zero anywhere. Now, they may not have been the percentages and the sizes that you want, but again, that's a working challenge. The other component is that totally over 1,041 participants were engaged in this process. Again, that's excellent. You may not think so, but it really is when you look at the typical survey piece.
I'd like to comment on this too, and I think we explained to you when you hired us that we've all, Mark and Deb and I, have done hundreds of searches, and really that is, you know, we think we should draw out crowds and that everybody should come and have input, and we hope that they will, but that's not usually the case, and this is a real good number. I think with all the ones I've done, it's probably as high as we've ever gotten, so.
So one of the questions or concerns was we only had 26 who attended the community forum. But if you were going to do the survey, there was not a need for you to go to the forum. If you participated in the focus groups, there was not a need for you to go to the forum. So the fact that we had over 1,000 participants, to me, says that we did some far-reaching efforts and we got some information that we needed to have.
And from my point of view, I was the recorder in the community forum. I think Mark was the one conducting it. I thought we got really good information. So the number may not have been as large as we wanted, but I think everybody there participated openly and really had a lot to say, and maybe we're representing a group. So I felt like the information that we got from that forum was very valuable.
Okay, I want to pause here to see if the board has any questions about the statistics. Just one other anecdotal note. We had the opportunity to have a focus group of students across the district. And let me tell you, I was busting proud of how our students handled the conversation. We need to give them a little bit more credit. And just as we listen to the high school students talk about the whole climate issue, our kids are more on it than we think they are. So I would challenge you to read the comments under the student sections that are part of the report. And let me close by saying this report is 295 pages long. So hopefully those people who had questions about the efficacy of the report will take the time to read all 295 pages so that you can see that, again, we may be closer in what our goals and what our values are than we think we are. So we're going to go on now and talk about the strengths.
Okay. Can you?
Oh, you want me to do this for you?
I can do this. All right, so we've organized the report around the questions that we ask. And I am going to even though we know you can read, I will kind of go down these just to capture them for the audience that isn't with us. But so the things, these are in no particular order, but they are the top things and the trends that we heard as we analyzed all of the data that we had collected through the 48 focus groups and the interviews. So the strengths of the district that we came up with were excellent teachers and administrators who are very hardworking. And then the diversity of the student population and the economics in the district and the community culture. So I think it was important that we included the economics there too, because we really heard a lot about the diversity in the community in the economic area. Supportive and engaged parents, community, and community partners. And that's been evident throughout our day in the district and the comments from tonight and our experience in general. It's just there's a lot of engaged and supportive people in this community. A commitment to addressing issues of equity, restorative practices, and social justice. Again, we heard some of that this evening as well. It was very evident in our focus groups. Can we come to the next one? Thank you. And as Deb said, great students. And to echo what she said, we all all four of us, we brought in an extra consultant for the student portion so that we could go to all four of the middle schools and spend a good deal of time with the kids and with this exact same questions that we ask you. And they're impressive, mature, articulate kids. And that, we enjoyed that part, and it keeps us grounded as well. Kind of reminds us of why we're doing a superintendent search. It's really for the kids. So that was an important part, and great students, I want to underline that. Resources, many of the teachers talked about the resources. Some of these you're going to hear on the concerns list too, and that's not unusual. Things come out on both lists. Positive reputation of the district and the community at large. Community stability, many people return and stay. I think we learned that unless you're born here and stayed here your whole life, you're really not considered a,
native Evanstonian. You're not a native Evanstonian if you weren't born here.
Yeah. So that's something that we all learned that day. School programs and the academic rigor was listed as a strength. And the community in general cares about good education. And that, of course, is reflected in the support you get from the community at large. So those were the strengths, I believe, and then we've got some...
Yeah, but I want to make a comment about the strengths.
Sure.
One of the things that typically happens when we're doing a superintendent search, and we've done the survey, is usually we come up with about 8 to 10 in each category. If you count these, you'll notice that in a couple of places we have as many as 12. And that goes back to what I had initially talked about when we talked about that 80% threshold, that if you get 80% who have indicated that that they're in favor of this, then that's what created the list. And so statistically, usually I use a program that analyzes the data, but because we had so many responses under the questions that were other, it really became important for me to actually read all of the comments and then figure out if they met the 80% threshold, which is one of the reasons why I had to read them all. And so it was like about a 13% point based on all of the information that we received that allowed me to get to that 80 degree threshold. And what we had was, we got to a point where that 13%, there were more than 8 or more than 10 that met that. And so we had to include it. I had to include it because even though it made more than 10, you would not include those if it really met what your threshold was.
It's like a tie for 10th place, a three-way tie or something.
Yeah, so.
Want to go on to the...
Questions, let me pause here. Questions about strengths. And I think the comments that were made earlier about changing the language, again, we don't have a problem with a language adjustment as long as the context remains, because this comes from what the community had to say, if that makes sense.
So the challenges.
Well, no, I think there's a question.
I'm sorry.
I don't have questions. I had suggestions for language. So, based on comments from marginalized populations, I just had some suggestions for language that we might add.
Is that to replace what's there or in addition to?
In addition to.
Okay, so I have some concern about in addition to, because what we've listed reflects the data. So adding to that is
My understanding when we discussed the leadership profile a couple weeks ago is that we were finalizing the leadership profile tonight based on the racial equity impact assessment tool.
That's correct.
Okay, so what
Why don't
I'm
we hear what
suggesting
you're
is
suggesting, and then
related
we
to
can...
that.
Okay.
So the second point, diversity in student population. My suggestion was to broaden that point to diversity in student and family population, and include economics, race, ethnicity, religion, LGBTQIA identity, immigration status, ability, and cultural values to capture.
Can I respond to that?
Community.
What happens with the profile with this particular piece of it, well, actually, it really is appropriate for the skill sets, because again, to publish this, we were trying to be concise. So if we can capture it in terms of this particular piece without identifying each of those pieces, is that making sense?
I think that it's important for our marginalized folks to be seen, feel seen and represented in what we capture as a strength. And that's the reason why I was suggesting the more expansive language. I'll leave it up to the rest of the board to
Can you say
contribute
one
to
more
that.
time what you were suggesting?
I suggested that there be a parentheses that says economics, race, ethnicity, religion, LGBTQIA, identity, immigration status, ability, and cultural values.
Can you share where we end on a leadership profile? Where is that seen? Where is that used in the next step in our process?
Yeah.
Can we review that?
The profile report, the expectation is that it becomes a public document. So from that standpoint, the inclusion of those words is fine. When we get to the skill sets and the characteristics, I need to caution you about not making those too expansive, because they go in an ad. They go in and you have a limited amount of space. And so you're trying to be concise and have an overview of what you're talking about, but not necessarily all of the individual component pieces.
So the 296 pages gets categorized into a profile that's maybe 2 or 3 pages, possibly, or less?
My understanding is it's this, kind of the beginning part of it,
That-
right?
The beginning part, the front and center.
The
Yes.
profile.
Yes.
The appendices are not.
Right.
And from there, you're making
Correct.
the advertisement that is aligned and linked to.
There was one other additional word that I was suggesting, and so where it says commitment to addressing issues of, I'm suggesting that we put racial equity, restorative practices and social justice.
This one?
This one.
Okay, commitment to addressing issues of racial equity. That's it, yeah.
I would echo that there's power in what is named, and being explicit is really important for us to signal what our priorities are as a district.
I think that's right, especially, again, if this is talking about the strengths of our district. Diversity can be a bit of a throwaway term, and I think being more explicit about how we are a diverse community is important.
Do you need that list again?
We'll look at it afterwards.
Okay, we'll get the list from you then. Make sure we've got it.
Well, actually, you'll be able to add it because it's your report.
I'm sorry?
We were talking about getting it, and we'll be able to edit it and add it because it becomes your report.
Right.
So,
Okay.
I think we agree. I think that's,
Okay. And then I echo the racial equity. being
okay.
explicit about
Okay.
that.
Any others? Then, shall I move on to the challenges? Are we
Yes.
ready? Okay.
Uh-oh, wait a minute. I'll
Give
go
me back
back.
to that screen. Okay. Cultural diversity. And we probably need a little, we'll see what we need to do here too, but what we've got listed is race relations, racial tension, implementing social justice, and restorative practices. I'll go through the list and then we come back to any of the things that you would like to discuss. But resources, again, remember we had resources as a strength. We come back now to resources and their distribution and trying to serve a diverse community and community with different needs, shifting and different needs. So there's a strength, but they need to be equitable. Curriculum, not focused enough. Too many initiatives, needs to include environmental studies. I think we heard that a lot tonight too, so we're right on target. But very much we heard from the staff that the curriculum needs to be a bit more focused, and they're torn with a number of initiatives per year, and I'm sure they're not the only school district that says that. Programming, providing academic rigor for brown and black students, early childhood and gifted. I think our intent here was to talk about making all curriculum accessible to all kids. So, there was a question about that earlier, and I wanted to give some explanation to that. Academics, the achievement gap disparities with brown and black students, as well as improving for all students. Then we went to some personal qualities.
Let me just go back, because one of the things...
Yeah, I don't have a very loud voice, sorry.
One of the things that was inclusive in, against the responses that we had, and while we had said improvement for all students, was special education. And so, again, we kind of didn't separate that. We could and add that as one of the dimensions. But it was the notion that all students, we need to particularly look at the achievement gap and disparities for brown and black students, but we also want all of our students to achieve.
And we wanted to specifically, in the one above that, mention early childhood. That seems to be a big thrust for the district. We had a whole group on early childhood that came and talked with us, and so it was important to mention the early childhood program as well. And then we need more diversity in the staff that reflects student population, and that would be across all of the staffs. There was a feeling that we're top-heavy in administration, and that teacher retention and teacher turnover was also an issue in the district.
So let me share with you, again, another anecdotal comment from the students that I had an opportunity to work with. I had one white female student say to us, as a part of giving her input, so if we're serious about racial equity and diversity, why is it that the only people I see talking about it to me are white female teachers? Now, this was a conversation from a 7th grader or an 8th grader at one school. And I'm like, okay, you're on the money. That's an excellent question. And so from the standpoint of courageous conversations, to be able to say that to somebody that you don't know, but that's what you feel, and have the rest of your group nod and going, yeah, that's right. Again, that made me feel good about where we are going in terms of conversation about race and equity.
I do. More perceived challenges, special education programs, educational options. Climate, culture, and morale, overall, especially of teachers, and the need for building administrative support. We just kind of tell you like it is, so we want to put this all out there for you to have. Communication at all levels, and I think that was mentioned earlier as well. Conflicts with parents and pressure groups. Leadership, both administrative and board. Fifth Ward, lack of a community school, and in general, the facilities are in need of an upgrade. And so those were, I think that's at the end of our list about the challenges that were mentioned, again, the top 10 or 12 that we heard during the day. So let's open that up for discussion a bit before we move on.
I have a question about the student comments. Where in the appendix are the student comments?
There, if you look on the appendix, I want to say that it's A, it's the appendix that has all of the focus groups.
All the focus groups.
Right, I've been looking for them and I can't find them.
There, if you look at page 30, hold on, it starts.
It's under appendix
Yeah,
A.
it starts on page 32, I think that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Did you find them?
With Shute 7th and 8th graders, and then Haven 7th and 8th graders, and Nichols.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments?
I had a comment about the section needs to include environmental studies. I'm wondering if that captures the broader sentiment that seemed to be wanting to have curriculum that prepares children to understand climate change and understand what can be done to disrupt that. So my suggestion was to take out needs to include environmental studies and potentially add the bullet point, a focus on, or a lack, if it's a challenge, a lack of focus on understanding climate change and currently having integration with the city's CART plan.
Got it. Move on, anything else? Can we move, shall we move on to the characteristics?
So I agree, the bullet point about personnel and more cultural diversity within staff that reflects the student population. And, I would note that when we look at the disaggregated survey results, the workforce diversity overall, it was 24.6% that showed that as one of the most important issues. But if we look specifically at our Black respondents and at our employee respondents, that it was significantly more than that, of 43.3% and 41.8%. So,
I think our Latinx respondents as well.
what's that?
Our Latinx respondents as well.
It was still, the Latinx response was close to the same as the overall. So I wonder if we can change the language to not just, more cultural diversity within the staff, but and I think a lot of the comments were around, and the example you gave, I think they focus on the need to recruit and retain Black educators, I think has come up a number of times. And I wonder if we can highlight that.
Under personnel?
Yeah. So more cultural diversity within staff, particularly
Black educators?
Yeah, but somehow getting the comment that it's recruiting and retaining Black educators.
Okay. The retention is part of the problem.
Right.
Yeah, that's what we heard.
Because teacher retention overall
Is a problem,
is,
yeah.
but I think in particular with Black educators is something that we have heard over again, and I think it's reflected in the comments.
Yeah, I would move retention up to where the other part.
Yeah, or maybe it's just a matter of kind of moving.
And that is what we heard.
Yeah. And I have a question too about the fourth bullet point, the programming, provide academic rigor for brown and Black students, early childhood and gifted. I'm not sure that I saw the same highlight. While certainly there were several comments that noted a desire for a gifted program or options for gifted students. I don't know that it necessarily, in my mind, rose to the level of something that needed to be included as a challenge. So I would propose striking that.
Well, based on the feedback that we got, there was a concern that gifted students, it's one of those not moving everybody else forward and leaving the gifted students behind. And so we wanted to capture that as well. And again, it goes back to that all students need to achieve, and we want to make sure that as we're moving forward, we're not ignoring quote-unquote gifted children, however that's defined. And sometimes that went back to the whole notion of academic rigor.
I'd be okay with gifted children if it really focused on our lack of identifying, marginalized, gifted children from marginalized communities, and that's a problem.
Yeah,
and
making sure,
in Florida, I know there was a couple of districts who adopted a more culturally responsive assessment to assess, Black and brown students, and they, of course, found tons of gifted Black and brown kids.
Of course.
So if we're going to include gifted, I would want it to be very specific in regards to identifying, or creating the processes, right, to identify gifted children from marginalized communities. I don't know.
I just am not sure that we have a focus or intention around, gifted and talented programming, and so I would again still propose striking that, but, and I wonder, in terms of, the desire to be concise, where we're talking about programming, instead of having special, I understand and appreciate the desire. I think we do want to highlight the challenges that we have around special education programming and some of the needs that we've heard from the community, but I don't know, I guess there's some just wordsmithing on that.
Having them in the same sentence feels like we're weighting them in the same way, and I'm not sure that.
So you think keeping them separate?
In terms of
I
programming,
would
it was
also
just-
strike gifted personally, but I just think that construction suggests that they have the same level of threat and concern, and I don't think they do.
That I agree with. Right? Yeah. I mean, I think it's right.
So leave it separate as is.
Some suggested language.
I'd take it out, but if it's in
you know
there, I
what,
don't think it goes there because it suggests that it's.
Right, I would take it out because, again, I don't think it's as weighted as
weight.
it seems, so, yeah, sorry.
Then let me assure you that at the next board meeting, you're going to have
Gifted
parents out, gifted parents out here.
And, I mean, we have had that in the
So I'm
past.
just
That's
saying.
fine. I mean, I think that's, our data shows us that that is not where our priorities need to lie. And I don't want to, I don't, again, looking at, and I did read all the comments and all of the whole 290
So you didn't have a life all
pages
weekend
as well.
either.
And I'm not sure I saw that as highly reflected as, for example, the need to recruit and retain Black teachers, the need to address the achievement gap, or the opportunity gap. So I just, in my mind, I'm not sure how it rose to the level of being a challenge. Yes, a few people, there were many things that a few people noted. I don't know that it would necessarily meant that everything that everyone noted was necessarily going to be in here, and I'm not sure that I saw everything reflected, so.
So I kind of felt the framing of that point doesn't capture an equity lens in the sense that we've discussed it. And so I'm uncomfortable with us leaving it as is, as a reflection of our district. So I felt like the point put an emphasis on what children and families need to do, as opposed to what the system needs to do.
Yeah, that wasn't the intent, so.
In order to create more equitable opportunities.
Yeah, it was to take away any barrier. I mean, I think that was the intent.
So my suggested language change is that providing marginalized students with equity and opportunity to achieve.
That I could get behind on, because again, if you give children access, and particularly from communities who've been marginalized, have not had that access, or don't have the resources, or the time, or the money.
They will shine.
They will shine.
That's true, yeah, that's what we believe too.
Through some of our work around, our policy change around the algebra for all. So I mean, I think it's, yeah.
And I think that's what we're after, so maybe that's a bit better wording for that, because I think that was the intent. That was the intent of that comment, so if the intent comes across better, let's change the wording and get that reflected. So that's good.
And then I just had a question. I didn't understand what a pressure group is. It's not a commonly descriptive term, so.
Trying to make it politically correct in terms of the intent, the language had to do with parent groups who pressure the board or the schools or the principals or to get their way. They come en masse, or they know someone. And again, this is from the feedback that we got during conversation and discussion, which we tried to add, that there's perception that there are parent groups who apply pressure or whatever their agenda is, whatever they perceive their need is, and that oftentimes can fragment the community.
Can I ask, in terms of the context, was this meaning more in terms of advocacy groups, or was this more in terms of like opportunity hoarding, like folks that have a lot of resources that are trying to control those resources, or folks that are more marginalized that are advocating for more representation and more visibility?
I think it's the first one. It was really the intent. Well, again, from my interpretation of what was being said across a number of groups, is that there are parent groups who have their own set agenda, who have social media conversations or have other kinds of things that attempt to pressure, to cause pressure in order to respond to what their perceived needs are.
I would worry that this wording stigmatizes marginalized groups that are trying to advocate, and we might want to rethink who we're referring to in that.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if we want to change it to opportunity hoarding, if that's the concern.
Because that was what it
Yeah,
boiled down to.
that might be more succinct and.
Right, because often people are blamed for being divisive when they're advocating for their marginalized needs.
So I think what
that
you're
language concerns me.
describing is, which I think is important that we kind of publicly name, is the difference between opportunity hoarding and opportunity prying. Which
I missed that. Opportunity hoarding versus what?
Opportunity prying. So for folks who are marginalized, who are seeking opportunity and who are fighting for opportunity and access, that would be described as opportunity prying. Whereas folks who are already in a privileged position, who are trying to secure that position or secure additional resources, would be described as opportunity hoarding.
And that was more the group that people were responding to.
Right, and we all heard that.
Well, that makes more
clear
sense
to you?
To me now. I think, changing it to opportunity hoarding would
I think it's,
be a little more descriptive.
Okay.
And I also had a question. I wasn't understanding, under challenge, it says leadership, both administrative and board, but it doesn't say what is challenging.
Well, again, I think when you read the individual comments, there was a discussion relative to turnover in administration. So in terms of challenges, that was some of the things that were highlighted. The fact that they felt that there might not have been enough support. Visibility. I mean, it was a laundry list of things relative to the notion of leadership, both at the administrative level as well as at the board level.
I think maybe consistency and visibility of leadership would be more descriptive.
I may be getting trapped in my own little quiet wormhole over here, but this profile, I'm reading this and I'm thinking, who do we want to be reading this? We obviously want it to reflect who we're looking for, but is this a profile that we're trying to put together that's for a potential candidate?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's the whole purpose. Yeah.
Well, not the whole purpose,
Not the whole
but that's
purpose.
part of
That's
the
part of
purpose.
the purpose.
And for us to utilize when we're reviewing and considering.
But this is a public-facing document that is meant for somebody who is researching us to see what the board who's going to be offering a contract.
So we don't want to scare anybody off.
Well, that's what I'm trying to read. I wanted to highlight the things that it should highlight, and I wanted to acknowledge real challenges, and I wanted to reflect, obviously, the board's priorities and the work of the administration. I think I'm an educator. I'm in this space. I think pressure groups is actually a good word, a good description. I think it says just enough. I'm not sure that being more specific matters to somebody from outside who's looking for the opportunity, but to know that that's enough to make the list matters, right?
But you think that is a more accurate description than saying opportunity hoarding?
I think, and since we're in the discussion part here, I appreciate the conversation where we're identifying stakeholders and possible adverse effects of what we're doing here. But I also think that we're at the tipping point now where we're going from talking about this process to the part of the process that future candidates are going to be looking at us at, both watching these meetings, hearing the discussions, and reading this information. And I think it's different advertising and marketing ourselves to a future candidate that we want to lure in and attract than it is to state the issues of the community in certain ways. And I want it to be real, and I'm not necessarily saying that I have a problem with anything that we've looked at thus far, that's why I've been quiet, but I'm trying to think about it as, it's different to read it as a board member and a community member, and it might be different looking at it from the outside. And I want someone to be able to read it and be attracted to those problems, and to be attracted to those highlights, right? To know what the challenges are that they're coming in with, and I just want us to be able to look at it from that lens and think, is this something that might be attractive for somebody to want to take on these challenges? Or are we creating a problem for ourselves? And as our consultants who do this, I figure you might have a lens into that too.
And again, that's partially why we crafted some of the language, the way we crafted it. And as you read through the comments that are related to development of this, it was really a matter of trying to condense and be concise with that language, because someone is not going to want to read 295 pages.
But somebody, when they come in to meet us,
Yes.
and we have a full in-depth conversation through the
Yes.
interview process, that's where we will get to elaborate on these things and convey our priorities and our desires in a future visionary for the district.
And you'll be crafting your own questions too, down the road, the questions that you want to ask, and they can be reflective of some of this discussion. I think they will be, some of the discussion you're having tonight.
Yeah, they should be.
They should be.
Because if we go back to the actual profile, laying the groundwork for both recruiting and screening from point one, and look at screening the application, to point B when you're screening your finalists, you want to, again, go back to this profile. So you want it to be clear on both sides, both in terms of your candidates and applicants, as well as the board, as well as the community. Because remember, there's another piece to this, and that's the final and community engagement process, in which the community will be expected to utilize the profile as they're looking at the candidates to give you more feedback and input.
Thank you.
Okay?
All right, characteristics and skill sets. And this is where we've taken the strengths and the challenges and tried to describe a person based on what you've told us that we might be looking for. Background as an educator with teaching administrative experience and working with special needs and early childhood programs. So we lumped a lot into that, but we were clearly heard there need to be some education in the background of this person. And with some of your areas that you're working on, being the special needs and the early childhood, it would be very helpful if they had a good understanding in those two areas. Visionary, can inspire and bring others along and bring others together. We heard this, I think, from every group we talked to. They were looking for a visionary, good communicator, both in written and verbal areas, with political savvy and relating to all facets of the community, including the students. Again, bringing us back to why we're all here.
The students indicated they want to see the superintendent.
And they'd like to talk to him or her.
They want to give the superintendent some information and some suggestions, and it's hard to do if you don't know who the superintendent is, or they kind of breeze through the building and never have an opportunity to talk to students.
So we specifically listed them because we think they're the most important part of our day. And then again, the next one talks about being a student-centered, works to do what's best for all kids. Experience in working with diverse student and community populations, racial, culturally, and economic contexts.
And again, that may be one that you want to expound upon.
Yeah.
Based on Anya's suggestions. But again, remember, this is what's going to be posted and publicized. And so we're going to be limited in terms of print.
But that one reflect one that Anya, that you had some comments on earlier, so we might want to make that consistent. Can make a commitment to issues of race and racial equity, culture, social justice, restorative practices, achievement for all students, especially those of color. And then the personal qualities of competence, dedication, sincere, student focus, thick skin. I can't tell you how many times we heard that. In order to make some changes, you've got to have some thick skin to get through some of the changes that you want to make. Honest, organized, fair. Good sense of humor always helps. Ethical, strong, can say no. And then such interpersonal skills as somebody who can build a good relationship. And I think that comes back to some of the things we heard about leadership and visibility and open door policies and access, being able to access your superintendent. Kind of lost my way there, sorry. Good listener, gets input. Accountable, we heard that word tonight as well. Exercises good judgment, approachable, very important. Cares, trust builder. You won't get anything done as a school leader if you can't build some trust. So for me, that's just such a key one, and as a person, that's what I work on first. I'm sure, Phil, coming into a district, that's important to you too, to be able to build up some trust and credibility. Can demonstrate a commitment to and success in working on issues of social justice, racial equity, restorative practices. Knowledge of and practice of issues of environmental, I'm sorry, I think I read that. But anyway, issues of environmental and climate, and we might want to change that to reflect the language we used earlier. Leadership skills such as a team builder can go against the norm, again, that thick skin. Strategic and planning and systems thinking. We think that's a big one too, that let's get some of the systems in the district in place so other things can flow naturally. Accountable, visible in schools and the community, approachable, visionary, innovative. That came up a lot too, that we need somebody who's creative and innovative and holds others accountable. An understand of and a commitment to high levels of achievement for all students, especially those of color. Other considerations and
well, we're going to see
stop.
If there are questions.
We'll pause for some thoughts on those.
I don't have a question, but I was thinking for the first bullet point that it may be useful to add dual language to the.
I'm sorry, to do.
Dual language.
Dual language?
To the list of skill sets.
Right, so, or, yeah, multilingual.
Okay.
Multilingual.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
And in working with special needs, early childhood, and multilingual
Okay,
populations.
that makes sense.
Populations, right. We've changed the terminology at the State Board of Ed, so we no longer refer to kids as English learners. They're emergent bilinguals, and we call the field multilingual learners, so, yeah.
Okay.
I would add a bullet that one of the skills be multilingual.
I'm sorry,
so
Joe.
that's in the
One is working
pulling
with a-
from the other, because I think possibly speaks another language.
One is working with the multilingual community, the other is having the skill of being multilingual.
So you're suggesting pulling that from the other where it is right
Right.
now and elevating it to one of the.
And I just wanted to kind of highlight for us and for our community that one of the things that showed up more prominently in disaggregated data that I think is appearing here, which is good, is this idea of having a visionary leader and the allusion to having a change agent. That showed up more prominently in the disaggregated results than it did in the average, the total average, and I think that it's great that it appears here. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, we heard that several times.
One
Other
other
comment?
thing that I would like to, if we can, where we say can demonstrate a commitment to issues of race and racial equity, I do think, and Ms. Shepherd had alluded to, the idea of racial consciousness, if we can include, racially conscious and can demonstrate a commitment to issues of race, because again, that's another one. If we look at the disaggregated data, Black respondents much more overwhelmingly listed that as an important characteristic. And so I think that it's important to honor that, and I think it is kind of, you know, embedded in there, but I think it's worth calling out.
Called out.
The other word that I would like to add in interpersonal skills is collaborative.
Okay.
I think especially, again, if we look at the disaggregated data and we look at what under the important leadership skills, if we look at our employee data, you know, that collaboration was really.
Yeah, I think that's a good one to add.
Right, and I don't know how I
think
missed
it's
that.
worth specifically.
Good point. We agree, because I know when I was.
Heard a lot of
looking-
that.
Yeah.
I just want to echo what Suni and Anya were saying, is that I think that we can't assume that everybody uses the same language to describe the same things. And so while some people might call it equity, some people might call it racially conscious, some people
Yeah.
call it change agent, like I think that a lot of those things are pointing to the same direction, and so we want to make sure those are included.
And the other phrasing was cultural competency. I think it was cultural competency and racial consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe can demonstrate.
Cultural competency and racial consciousness.
Yeah.
The bullet on knowledge of practices and issues of environmental and climate, I think it should say environmental justice and climate change.
Yeah, we could make that more like the one we had in the other bullet point. Climate change.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, there's several bullets that address social justice. And I'm wondering if there's a way that we can create a concise statement that captures all that and brings it to the top and grasp the values of our district that demonstrate issues of commitment to racial equity, cultural. It just seems like it's a lot of repetition, and it's covered in several bullets. And I'm wondering if we could just create one concise statement that we could bring to the top that would capture all that. So there's the 1, 2, 3, 4. The fifth bullet down, then the sixth one.
And the third on slide 10.
Yeah, and then the third on slide 10, I would say the fourth. I think that all belongs together. And if there's a way that we can capture that without being redundant in multiple bullets, or if there's a reason why you separated those in so many bullets.
Well, I think the reason why we separated it partly had to do with, again, the language. In some you had restorative practice, and some you had racial justice, and some you had racial equity. And so again, trying to honor those individual pieces rather than collapse them is kind of how we ended up with this. And we heard it over and over and over and over and over again, but the language was different. And so we didn't want to offend by not including the variances in language in those terms, or with those terms. And so that's kind of how it got separated, I think, a little bit in terms of having more than one bullet.
But I think to Rebecca's point, the fourth to last bullet point does say, can demonstrate a commitment to and success in working on issues of social justice, racial equity, restorative practices, which is the same racial equity, culture, social justice, restorative practices. So I'm not sure that it's adding anything to have them as two. So, and I'm looking at the printed version. I'm sorry, I don't know if it's the same ones on.
Yeah, slide 9 and 10.
Yeah. So the last one here, and then if you go to the next one.
We can combine that. Yeah.
So I think that we
makes
can
sense.
probably combine that and include.
We'll have one less that way, too.
Ideas of racial consciousness and cultural competency.
Yeah, perhaps it can say racially conscious, comma, can demonstrate a commitment to issues of
race,
racial equity, social justice, restorative practices in a culturally competent way for achievement for all students, especially those of color.
I would actually like to keep the achievement for all students, especially those of color, as one separate. And I would agree with bringing those to the top, personally. I think, that if we again look across all groups, really. It was striking that addressing the opportunity gap was, pretty much the top priority across the board.
Right.
And so I think that, I know that we say at the beginning that these are in no particular order, but that being said, I think there is some power in putting that first, and I do think
I never have a
highlighting it as
problem
its
with putting
own
them.
gives it a little additional weight and doesn't
Yeah.
allow it to.
I never have a problem with doing it that, putting your one or two top ones at the top. We can't rank order them, but there's nothing wrong with trying to stick a couple of things at the top, so.
But what it also, again, creates, however, is then another dynamic for discussion for those people who thought that this one should have been the most important, or this one should have been
That's
the most
true, too.
important. So you have the people who resented having forced choice, who only wanted one, and there should be at the top. And so again, that's one of the reasons why we presented in random order, so that you don't give an opportunity to have that debate. That these are important from the perspective that they are the theme across the group of people who participated, and all of them are important from that perspective.
That's a different way of looking at it,
So
yeah.
that's kind of
Where you're
the
coming from, yeah.
reason why it's been done that way, because again, you want to deter any additional negative vibes relative to the information, and not have people get into the argument of mine is better like that.
Right.
Okay?
Is that it?
No. we gotta do
All
other.
right, let's go to other. And Deb's on.
Okay. Other considerations for the board. And again, this was that fourth question in terms of the board should consider these things. Some of them sort of rolled over into challenges, and some of them rolled over into skill sets and characteristics, and so we tried to weed those out and really focus on things that were highlighted as, again, serious priority issues. So, has experience. The majority of the people talked about having had classroom experience, working with diverse environments, both urban and suburban, and a lot came out in terms of districts of a similar size. That you don't want necessarily somebody that's coming from a one school district at this point. So I think that those were the highlights for that. A doctorate is nice. The majority of people that we spoke with said a doctorate would be nice, but it's not necessary, it's not essential. They were more talking about experience, having some advanced study possibly, but not necessarily having to have the doctorate degree. And I was frankly a little surprised at that because we have such a sophisticated community. I would think that people would say, they've got to have had all of this additional education in order to be able to communicate on the level at which we perceive ourselves to be relative to that conversation. Should live in Evanston or nearby, or be willing to move into Evanston or nearby. Again, that was a conversation where people felt that you had more investment in the community. You didn't have to necessarily live in Evanston, but certainly Skokie. And so, again, that was the conversation with regards to connection to the community, visibility in the community, and not necessarily live downtown Chicago. And will make a commitment to the district's work on equity, social justice, and restorative practices. Again, that came up over and over and over again under all the categories, particularly it came up again under. And so for me, it demonstrated the fact that people are very serious about this. And they're very serious about moving forward, and they want to make sure that even though it's been listed in 4 other places, that the board recognizes the seriousness of making sure that the next person has demonstrated and will commit to the follow-up on your work. And then needs to have knowledge of educational trends. Part of that went with the innovation and some of those other things, but
best practices.
Best practices. We've been the Lighthouse District, all of those things. And so not just having someone who has never taught, hasn't been to any conferences, don't know what the latest is. Not that you have to use them, but you at least need to know what they are. And so that was how that particular one planned out.
Do we want to add the word racial in front of equity to make it consistent with other places where we're naming it as racial?
We can do that.
Yeah. No,
Thanks.
Okay, moving on.
I'll go do that. Possibly speak another language. Needs to realize the district's history. This came up time and time again, that you got to have an appreciation of the district and the community and the historical perspectives. Can listen and respond to the voices of all. And that's, again, trying to make sure everyone in the community is heard. We'll be able to work collaboratively and cooperatively with the board and is fiscally responsible. Which kind of goes without being said, but it came up enough times that we wanted to make sure we listed it.
And just, again, to go back to Joey's question, that other considerations for the board, that's just for us, that's not going to
For
be...
you to consider.
For you to consider.
Sometimes we say, what else does the board need to know? And it's just their chance then, if there's something that one of our questions didn't cover, and they had this on their mind when they came in to talk to us, that's their opportunity to tell you anything else that's on their mind.
For example, there's nowhere else in any of the other questions that talks about whether they need to, what kind of degree they need to have. Right. So this is the opportunity to add some
of those kinds of things that you can consider.
Okay, so in summary, the board was provided with an extensive breakdown of engagement participation through the report and in-depth comparison provided by the board president. SUNY did take all of the data and did a spreadsheet that allowed you to make comparison across groups within the context. One of the reasons that the report is 295 pages long is because we took each group and subset and looked to see so that you could actually see the graphs and charts related to how they responded to the questions, again, to add to the board's information about how this played out across multiple racial groups. The consultants, based on our experience, believe that this is an acceptable number of diverse participants for the purposes identified in terms of this first part of the community process. Again, there are questions about, the efficacy of the survey. We found that the survey, this type of survey for the purposes of developing a profile has been appropriate across the country. It gives us information. It gives information to people who are considering looking at and taking the job. And while it's not perfect, it does do the job in terms of giving us that information, both in a quantitative and qualitative, measurable way to be able to share that information. The board and community ambassadors should be complimented on their extended outreach efforts. I already talked about that. Some of the things that you've done here have not been done in other places, who essentially have the same goal as you have, but they had not taken that extra step and made that extra commitment. And so again, you will be a model for other searches that I do in terms of that. And I know Ann and Mark and I have all talked about the extensiveness of what we did in order to try to capture those groups who are often not at the table. Have we done it perfectly? No.
But have we made some improvements? I hope so. And I think you've demonstrated that, what you're about. And you did what you said you were going to do, and you did as well as we could do on it. And can we learn a little? Yeah, like the comment that you made, Cindy, at the beginning about using the term church, we picked up on that too, but we didn't catch that. So we're all going to learn a little bit. So it's always good, right?
Well, I just want to say thank you. I mean, I know this was a lot of information to process. I know that we were asking for it in a format that is not typical for districts to ask of you in the search process. And I appreciate that you did give us the information that we were asking for. So thank you very much for that. And I hope that you can see in terms of the suggestions that we have, I hope that they're taken in the spirit, that it's all about trying to make sure that this really reflects the equity lens that we are trying to, again, to walk the talk, as you were saying. And that, this was a great start. I don't think we're, except for, I think I was the only one who had an issue with anything that was in it in terms of taking something out, but it more was about adding to it and refining some of the language.
This isn't the end-all either. When you begin to write your questions, you can certainly include things that are your goals that we want you to include things on this profile, but we also, you're going to have some financial questions, and you're going to have some questions on other lines too. So it's not the only document that you can use to select a superintendent. And the other thing I want to warn you just a little bit, now the superintendent walks on water, right?
No. My adage is they can part Lake Michigan with the sun in one hand, the moon in the other, and walking carefully, be able to balance the world between their knees. It's a tall order. Just to give you a brief update, I checked before the meeting. We have approximately 20 applicants, 17 of whom have completed the application. The others are still in the submittal stage. We have 11 states represented. And I can't give you much more detail about that. Now, will all of those candidates meet the mark? Absolutely not. We just need one good one.
We want 4 or 5 really good ones for you to make your job hard.
Right.
But we're really looking for that one special one that'll come to the top. And I've got some recruiting efforts going on this week that we're following up on. I think all of us have reached out to different people that we're still working with. So it's moving along.
And we've had several members of the community make suggestions of people that we're trying to contact and reach out to in terms of their being interested in this position. And I also want to say I appreciate the community members. I have had a number of, not a whole lot, but a few phone calls or emails who have had questions or needed to verify the information that they had. And so those people who I've appointed as ambassadors to get the word out really did their job. And if they had a question, then they didn't hesitate. And I hope that we continue to be open and transparent in responding to each and any question at any time of the night or day, because that's important. And then the final piece is, from our perspective, we collectively have put a lot of work into getting through this process. It will be critical that the community and the board holds hands when we get to the candidacy stage. If you have someone coming in and has to, try to appease or try to calm down one group over another, or within the board there's a split, it makes it, and as a retired school superintendent, it makes the job impossible. You cannot do what needs to be done for kids and for staff if you're putting out fires before you even get in the job. And so again, as we're proceeding, just very quickly, the process will be the next thing that Suni and Adila and I will be fighting over, will be developing the day in the district. And I've been very careful in describing that process to members of the community, that the community does not vote on the superintendent. They provide input and feedback to the board. And so this last piece of the community engagement is the day in the district, where you will have your top 2 or 3 candidates come and spend a day essentially doing what we've done, talking to people in terms of focus group, visiting schools, talking to community people. Everybody is not going to be able to be a part of those during the day focus groups, but there is another community forum. It will probably be televised so that, again, people will have an opportunity to see who the candidates are. But I'm really going to press that we not, as a community, make comparisons. Because when you make comparisons, it becomes that battle of favorites. And if the board selects someone that wasn't your favorite, then you've already hampered the new superintendent coming in, because now they've got to figure out how to get you on board and accept them. And so I would hope that the community will take seriously the next engagement forum. Some people may not agree with it, but as I said, as an incoming or as a retired school superintendent, I value having the community behind me when I start at the job. And if not, it makes the job impossible. So in addition to that, parting Lake Michigan and all that other stuff, then you've got a battle to fight that doesn't necessarily need to be here if we find someone that matches most of, they're not going to be 100%, but matches most of the criteria that you've set aside and established within the profile. And I'll continue to preach that to everybody that talks about the community engagement part.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Are we actually voting on?
Yes.
Okay,
So the last recommendation is that the board approve the report and profile as presented or with proposed modifications.
Okay, so it will be with the proposed modifications?
Yes.
So I guess I will go ahead and move that the board approve the report and profile with the proposed modifications as discussed during this meeting.
Second.
Mendoza? Yes. Halpern?
Yes.
Tanya Vudi?
Yes.
Hernandez?
Yes.
Lindsay Ryan?
Yes.
Cartha?
Yes. Thank you very much.
And so the next step is we will clean it up and add the modifications. And again, the expectation is that it will be posted on the district website so that everyone who wants to see what was said can read all 295 pages.
And we'll get it posted on ours as well. Not the
Yes.
whole, not all of that, but the profile.
Yeah.
It might blow ours up.
All right, excellent.
Thank
In
you.
terms of process, though, then in terms of process, we have selected dates for interviews.
So the application deadline is October 6th.
Correct.
I believe October 28th, is that right? Is when we have a closed
Monday,
session
yep.
to review the
recommendations.
candidates that are being.
We'll do a training workshop at that night, too.
Right. And then,
2 weeks later are.
yeah, I don't,
interview,
offhand, I don't, but we have dates
Like
that we.
November 12th, 13th, 14th.
Yeah, that's November 12th, 13th, 14th are your first round interviews.
Right.
And then the day in the district in
Is in
relation to that.
December.
December is either first, second, or third, or second, third, and
Yeah, the
fourth.
3 days in December, I don't remember offhand, but we have, those are
Yeah, you guys did a
online.
nice
We
job
agreed
with
to
those.
them in July. They should be in all of our calendars.
It's
So
on the website.
it's on the website for sure, yeah.
I hope you don't have a long agenda after us.
All right, well, thank you very much. We really
Thank you.
appreciate the work and the report.
Long agenda.
We do have 2 other discussion items, the Achievement and Accountability Report revisions and the opening of schools enrollment update. Given the time, I would ask, and knowing that we now have the October 21st, which was supposed to be the joint board meeting, I will, I guess, put it to the team. Do we want to go ahead and try to, at this late hour, tackle these important discussions, or do we want to, should we just go for
I
it?
think our general feeling is we're here.
Okay.
and So we'd probably prefer to take on the 2 discussion items.
Okay.
Do the timing of it to give us more time based on the board feedback to be able to make adjustments as needed.
Okay. All right, then, Kylie, I will turn it over to you for the Achievement and Accountability Report.
Great. Adela, do you have the clicker?
Oh, I think it might be on the.
I think it's on.
Everyone take a stretch, stand up for a second and just stretch while we get. Okay, no, go ahead. I will start introducing while we stretch. Okay. So I'm gonna start talking and then we'll go through. So I would like to first thank you all for the opportunity to share this presentation and talk through some of these proposed changes to the current structure of the Achievement and Accountability Report. Just some background information and context. This is an annually published report. Our past versions have generally included reports of different assessment results. And these have ranged in length. The last year's report was 43 pages long. The 2012 report was 201 pages long. So over the years, we've made big improvements in readability, accessibility for families, but it's still quite lengthy. The report is externally facing. It's intended for a community audience. We have other structures internal to the district that are utilized by school educators, school leaders, district management to look at and review data. Really, this report is intended for our community audience. I would say that if we want more people using and accessing the data, thinking about what changes we can make that will foster engagement with the report and the information contained in the report is an important lens to use. So this is an overview of the approach I took to informing the revisions. I started with a review of all the historical reports. I already discussed that. I then went on to a comparative report review. I looked at 12 districts and District 202. I looked at districts including Baltimore, Houston, Tulsa, San Francisco, New York, Boston, Cleveland, Philadelphia, Madison, Jefferson County, other places. I really tried to focus in on districts that are doing a lot of work around equity and diversity and trying to tackle issues of longstanding achievement gaps within their community to try to kind of get a feel for what would be applicable in our context. I also solicited community input through a survey. Why did we want to solicit community input? The importance is around unintended consequences. I did not want to disrupt systems that were already in place by community groups, community advocates, other members of our broader community area who might be using this report in ways that we don't know about. And so it was really important to me that that be solicited so that we didn't have any sort of unintended consequences. I think it's important also that we provide information that meets the needs of our community, since this is a community-focused report. So we sent out the survey. I sent it out to over 180 people, had 30 responses. That's a 16.6% response rate. It's not great, but it was also conducted over the summer on a topic that many may not necessarily be as passionate about as all of us. And I also conducted one-on-one discussions with several key stakeholders, including folks like Meg. Jill from Evanston Case was very kind to give me a lot of her time. Carrie Levy from 202, several board members, education researchers, colleagues in the district, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of people, lots of one-on-one discussions. And then I also conducted the Racial Equity Impact Assessment tool on our current report. And lastly, I considered certain principles in thinking through kind of guiding the considerations. These were, the principles are informative, inclusive, and valuable, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. So the purpose of having these principles is really to have a kind of a construct around what the role the report could play in public informing, and to really center the report on the community. From these principles, I just want to unpack them a little bit. So informative, the notion that the data has to be clear, it has to be meaningful and therefore longitudinal, so people can see change over time and have multiple data points to help them understand trends and do that level of analysis. And that the visualizations of the data are meaningful and accessible. They have to be things that people can easily interpret, easily understand. We also want to make sure that when we're thinking about informative data, we are considering the need to balance information sharing with protecting student privacy and confidentiality. One of our most important things as a district is to safeguard student information and to prioritize maintaining student privacy. And we do that through monitoring and making sure that anything that we're sharing publicly is not potentially identifiable, and also that we want to have conclusions based on data that are from N sizes or sample sizes that are meaningful enough for us to actually draw valid and reliable conclusions. In terms of inclusive, the important part here is to think about making sure we're using techniques that include data for all of our students, and making sure that when we think about our district accountability report and our district reporting, that we're including all of the kids that we serve in that reporting. Additionally, making things accessible to multiple audiences. And I mentioned that briefly, but I'll go over that in addition. But one of the things that I would really like to do with this revision process is I would like to be able to provide this report in both English and in Spanish. And I think that that's a viable long-term goal. And so I want to move to that direction, because I do think it's really essential that as we see the population of students that we're serving change, we also change our reporting to meet the needs of our community. In terms of the principle about being valuable, I think it's really important that we check in that this report is actually helpful to the community. It's got to play a role. Reporting for reporting's sake is not sufficient, right? It might be necessary, but it's not sufficient to actually engage our community in these important conversations. And so we want to make sure that we're providing information and data that is both informative in terms of being clear and understandable, but has meaning and can be useful. So we need both informative reporting and valuable reporting. Lastly, one consideration that I don't show on this, but that will come through as we talk about the models, is really the importance of focusing on what we know matters for students, what we know matters in terms of long-term learning, things around student engagement, student agency, and joy. The joy our children experience in their classrooms and in their learning environments, sense of belonging, sense of meaning, all of these things show our values and our commitment. And so looking at ways to make the report a more holistic view of student learning, staff contributions, educator contributions, and community and principal contributions. So now I'm going to quickly cover some of the survey results. These were also included in the memo. So in terms of use of the report, this is kind of a snapshot of how the survey respondents are using the report. And I would also like to just quickly thank and acknowledge all of the people who took the time to take the survey, to give feedbacks, to sit down and meet with me, to share their thoughts and opinions. I had some really remarkable conversations with folks around their needs. And so just really appreciate their commitment to sharing their thinking around this. Over 55% of our respondents were parents. I think that that's really important to note. The rest were kind of evenly distributed across community members, administrators, youth-serving organizations. Luckily, 90% of our survey respondents were aware of the report, so I feel this is a strong sense of our target audience. These are our people that we are engaging with this report. I think it's also important to note that 44% of the folks said they use it annually, and 23% used it this year, but not in prior years. So overall, people are using the report primarily to learn about the performance of schools in our community and about their own children's school. And when we subset that to parents, that goes even higher, and I'll cover that in more detail in a moment. Another question, and for the other here, this other represents 9 people who kind of said, I do all of these things, or I do these things plus, I am interested in just learning about the areas of need in my community so I can better support my own child's school. So one question that was interesting in terms of how people responded was people's perspective on what the main purpose of the report should be. This is an area where I feel there's not as clear consensus about what the goal of the report is, which of course makes the construction and the planning around the report more challenging. So it's hard to focus on a report that serves every purpose, bless you, and in this other category, this was predominantly people who said, all of these things matter. I want the report to do all of these things and more. So the intended purpose of the report is really critical to this design, right? Design thinking says that we really need to understand what our primary purpose is. Trying to serve too many purposes actually winds up undermining the efficacy of what you're producing. And so I think that's something important just to highlight from the survey responses. Now, I did ask about possible changes. So 66% of the respondents either agreed or strongly agreed to the statement that there should be changes to the report. So it's not overwhelming, but it's a majority. Here are some of the things that people responded to in terms of changes. You will notice that the most interesting finding, perhaps, that jumps out here is a preference for duplicate reporting. A lot of people did not disagree or strongly disagree that getting rid of duplicate reporting was a change that they would like to see. Many people commented and also shared in the one-on-one conversations that while the state report card data might be really valuable, people don't know where to find it. And so there's an information gap and a knowledge gap in how to access and utilize that tool. So as you all know, board members, the state report card has really wonderful, remarkable interactive features where you can analyze the data, you can subset it by different populations of students, you can look at it longitudinally over time. A lot of the one-on-one conversations said, man, this is a really great tool once you know it exists. And so this is an opportunity for us to kind of fill that need and to address that opportunity in our community to get more information out there about data tools that already exist and are available. So another interesting thing to note is the pronounced desire to highlight the accomplishments and successes of students, staff, and schools. So that's something that I think has been bubbling up and something that we've had conversations about here in the board meetings and in other places. I think also a critical feature is the need to show the data over time. Longitudinal data is something that is considered by many something that is necessary for the success of monitoring and understanding trends over time. So some of the changes that came out also in the open-ended comments were desire for consistent reporting, data tables with year-over-year performance, a need to go beyond test scores, beyond just reading and math assessment data, and to make sure we're maintaining access to longitudinal data and access to information about additional resources. So just to note, I think many people in the responses felt that the report was very single-faceted, covering only assessment results. And so incorporating that when looking at the models, you'll see that that's something that kind of weighed into the thinking for the recommended changes. So parents, 81% of the parents use this report to learn about the performance of their children's school. This is an interesting highlight to me because all of the school level data is in the appendix of the report. So if you are a parent and that's what you're looking for, you're wading through that data. It's not accessible to you. It's really challenging for you to get to the data that is relevant for you. And so I think that's something for us to know. 50% of the parents strongly disagreed that duplicate reporting should be eliminated. Many wanted more information about where they could access additional report information. Many half thought that the report should be more concise, right? As a working mom myself, a parent of 2 kids, I don't spend my evenings reading 40-page long reports. I'm sure many of you don't have the time to do that. I do read research reports, but that's for pleasure. And so I think that that's an important thing that we should attend to, the needs of our families. 87.5% of the parents agreed or strongly agreed that the information should be presented in ways that are accessible to multiple audiences. And all parents agreed or strongly agreed the report needs to show the data over time. So now I'm going to move on to the models of the report. Are there any questions about the survey? It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I think the only comment that came to mind about the duplicate reporting and the idea that people don't know that these other tools exist and don't know how to access them is that when we talk about the state report card, that's showing the PARC or the IAR test, not the MAP data. So
it doesn't show MAP. Yeah.
It does not, right.
No.
Ours shows MAP. So we can point parents to the state report card, and I think we should, and that those are tools that we should highlight. But I think we also need to just make sure that people are aware that it might look a little different from what we're showing in our reports because it's a different assessment.
Yeah, the state report card actually shows a lot more than just the PARC or IAR data. It shows enrollment, teacher ratio, 5 essentials data. It shows chronic absenteeism, college and career. I mean, there's a lot of measures that are part of the state report card beyond strictly the assessment data. And so it is a real treasure trove for people like me, treasure trove of information about performance measures beyond just those tests.
It actually won the governor's award for the best state report card.
Yes, it's pretty awesome. I mean, as far as state report cards go, it's pretty awesome.
So that's the kind of,
Quote me?
were people given those examples of like, that's what's on the state report card and those are the things that they wanted to see, or they don't even know that that's available? I guess I'm not, when they say they want duplicate information, I'm not sure what.
I think people, and this is my impression from the survey, the open-ended comments and the one-on-one conversations, people feel like information is siloed and it's not consistently provided. It's in lots of different places, and by having it be duplicated, they can make sure they have access to it. And also with the state report card, it is an information gap. Those people who know about the state report card data kind of said to me or wrote in the comments, like, I am aware of the state report card data, but I know that my colleagues and peers in my group and other members of my PTA or other members of my school community are not aware of that and don't know how useful a resource this could be for answering the questions that they have.
I also wonder the duplication part. The question I wrote down was, the reason that there's this report for us is different than what it would be on a school level.
Right.
And is there a common way or a time of year for school leaders to share their school data that's the same information that's being shared here, but they can do the messaging with their families and communities that takes it off of this docket and puts it on the school leadership relationship realm? And
So it's almost like I planted you in the audience. That was not a plan, but that is a beautiful segue, and I'm going to use it to my advantage. So yes, there is absolutely a way to do that, and that is part of what I am proposing here tonight. So I would like to start by sharing with you this report from San Francisco. So I picked out some of the most interesting kind of jazzy models to share with you that we could kind of leverage these great ideas out there in places that are doing this work well and bring those learnings back to our community. So San Francisco Unified School District does this pretty remarkable profile. It looks like this when you print it out. It's hard to read on the screenshot because when you screenshot it, it's the back and the front. But it's this 4-page profile. Looks like this. And they do this for the district data. It's all disaggregated by subgroup, 3 years of longitudinal data over time with small levels of analysis of the trends, little comments about the trends and what they see for the highest performing racial groups and the lowest performing racial groups, called out explicitly, their commitment to equity here. And then kind of for every school gets its own identical, virtually identical report, so that if you are a parent, you can look at the report for the district, you can look at a report for your child's school. And the school leaders in San Francisco Unified School District use this as a tool to communicate with their school communities about what's happening in their schools, right? Sort of like as part of their state of their schools, they share this information. And this becomes part of the fabric of how they communicate about their school performance. So that's one model that I wanted to share. And go ahead.
What time of year does something like this come out for a school in San Francisco?
Well, in San Francisco, where they have a team of analysts, this report comes out in the fall. And so it's spring data, right? Last year's data, obviously, and it comes out and it's used at back-to-school conferences, stuff like that. So we would have to make some substantial resource adjustments to make that vision a long-term reality here. I will just be candid about that. It would take more resources than I have available in our department to make that possible.
You mean on that timeline?
Yes, to make that timeline work.
I also think the state of Illinois drives that timeline too, because the state is still cleaning the data for their report cards as well currently too.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, but, and while this includes their state assessment results, my proposal would not include that. And so that would not be necessarily a barrier for us. So I've solved that problem already. But yes.
I was just saying, it's not just us.
Yes, it's not just us. It's not just us. I mean, there are a lot of places with different cadences of reporting. So it's really, Anya, to your point, it's really about the utilization of the data and what the intended purpose of it is. Okay. Highlighting Philadelphia, I just wanted to show you this super impressive example from our colleagues in Philadelphia. They have an interactive website for their community where you can see they have snapshots of kind of all of their data, and up at the top you can scroll through these different things where you can look at student achievement, you can look at school progress reports, you can look at general information, enrollment. Families can kind of scroll through any number of things and see a real-time data dashboard of what's going on, and that's very impressive. Obviously, that's something that we may not be set up for, but wanted to share that as a great district-wide model. In Jefferson County Public Schools, they have a focus on equity, and what Jefferson County does is they do a 2-page long front and back report on only 2 focal areas. They focus on 2 things. In their whole district, they have 2 things that they focus on. Right now, they're focusing on literacy and college readiness and on discipline and school culture. And they do some analysis around geographic lack of equity and inequity between student groups. And one thing that I really wanted to elevate for you guys to see is here in this report, they leverage student voice. So they're pulling out student voice when they're talking about student experiences, and that plays a significant role in their assessment of how they're doing as a district.
Do you know how they collect that?
Yes, they have a really wonderful survey tool that they have designed, and we're looking at some of the different survey models that are out there. Joaquin and I are looking at some different models to see what we can draw on. Now I'd like to take you all to Tulsa, where they're doing some really incredible stuff. Over here in Tulsa, they have an annual report where they highlight, the folks in their community and the different kind of ways of learning. So they have these pages about their schools where they talk about student accomplishments. They highlight places where students are taking leadership, they're taking agency, they're creating learning opportunities, they are participating in national triathlons, different sporting events, different partnerships with the high school to learn about different options and pathways. They look at also kind of district-wide data, and they look at different achievement statistics, but they look at things like, 150 students took, the advanced placement class. They're looking at things that are not just assessment scores. They're trying to look at measures and data that highlight and elevate student accomplishments that are key levers for kids' learning. And they really try to extend that learning beyond the classroom. They think about real-world learning opportunities, students being out there and getting opportunities in after-school programs, and kind of the holistic approach of what students are learning in arts, in kind of non-core content areas. And so I just want to highlight that. And then they also have pages where they highlight teacher contributions. They talk about different Golden Apple winners. They talk about the Teacher of the Year. They highlight teachers who have led and won different grant applications, different ways that teacher leaders and educators are contributing to the school learning environments beyond just the classroom. And I also want to highlight the fact that they take the time to elevate school leaders and talk about school leaders and the things that the school leaders are doing to contribute. They also talk about community, They also talk, and I don't have a page here for it, but it was included in your packets. They also have a page where they talk about community and what different community organizations are bringing to the schools and how those partnerships are creating meaningful learning opportunities for students. I will say that in dialogue with Meg, she was very impressed and saw a potential for this sort of model in our district to be able to elevate and highlight the accomplishments and the contributions and the important things our educators are doing above and beyond the measures that we're currently utilizing. And so she was very enthusiastic about this report and the potential that this report has for our district as something to look at as a model. So in addition to looking at all these models and all the other things I talked about, we also took time to do the racial equity impact assessment on the last version of the District Achievement and Accountability Report. That report scored a 16 using the tool. As you all know, the goal is to have a score within the range of 25 to 30. And so we definitely would like to see that improve. And following the conclusion of this and conversations we have here and conversations I have with others, once we have a new report moving, we'll run the new report through the racial equity impact assessment tool to see that we are making the progress. And we will continue to do that, to continue to improve it and focus on continuous improvement. So here's the time where I'm going to summarize the recommended changes. So I recommend that we create a model report in which we are incorporating data related to the 4 areas of the Tulsa report around recognizing student accomplishments and leadership, particularly in non-core subject areas such as the arts and civics, social studies, things that we can and have an opportunity to elevate and recognize, that we also recognize teacher and educator leadership and accomplishments, and I would also include the members of our paraprofessionals union in that, and recognize and highlight principal leadership and school accomplishments, and of course our community accomplishments and contributions. And the community groups that I've spoken with are also very enthusiastic about having an opportunity to note the contributions that they're making to our students' learning. And then we would also include data for the district with all of the essential key elements, longitudinal and by subgroup. And I would expand this to include our English language learners, making sure that we're disaggregating data in that way. Definitely maintaining our NWEA MAP assessment results, DRA, ISIL, but I would also want to expand to include school demographics, attendance data, and also focal measures of the 5 essentials, because we know that attendance really matters for student learning. That's what the research tells us. And so I would propose that we include those measures that we know from research and evidence are strong predictors of long-term student success. And we can evaluate future measures which could be included over time as those things become more available, such as kids. So, and SEL measures, of course, over time, once we're there. And as part of this process, we would create the school level data profiles that would also be available, and I would like to work with our principals and our school leaders to make sure that that meets their needs and is on a time frame suitable to allow them to be using it with their school communities. So I think that these recommendations further our transparency by bringing a lot of this data together. Right now, if you want to look at your demographics, you go one place, your 5Es, you go somewhere else, attendance, you go somewhere else. Bringing that all together in one place will help facilitate understanding. It will increase access and impact for our families and our parents in particular by creating school reports. And as we kind of scale back some of the state reporting as necessary to make these changes and make room for these changes, we would be able to also increase awareness and access to those state report cards. So thinking about how do we link them on our page, how do we push out information about those as a tool, how to use those as a tool and make that more available. And over time, also kind of looking for ways to refine this, but making sure we maintain consistency, because that is a theme that was pretty loud and clear from our colleagues. Thank you. So now I open it up to your questions at this late hour of 10:47.
I just want to say that I love the recommended changes, starting out with several different opportunities for recognition, and that I think a report that has a point in time like this, when there's a built-in mechanism to be gathering recognition type information from people, it gives you an opportunity to celebrate throughout the year leading up to the publishing of a report, and that's huge for climate and culture, for people to, however you're going to get that information, for people to recommend their peers, or for leadership to recommend their staff. However that's going to happen, that's a great thing for community.
Yeah, and recognizing that we do have the high five recognition as a mechanism already that exists for people to kind of nominate people at their schools. So.
Yes, and that's a wonderful mechanism, and I love reading the Fast Five. I'm such a nerd. But, this is really like a values document about our community, and having it be memorialized in an annual report that is us, this is our kids, this is who we are, this is the things that we prioritize, this is our vision for a holistic approach to student and child development and all of the things that we know matter for kids. I think that could be powerful, very progressive, really kind of, exciting.
I want to say I love the blend of having the long-term picture, the longitudinal picture, and also capturing values and capturing holistic learning and those intangible things that make people love their school, their teachers, their friends, etc. And I think, that is something incredibly valuable that humans bring to our district, and that is most of what we do. So I think finding a way to do that is, I think it'll be restorative for a lot of people to be able to see their community showing up in the way that they experience it and they feel it, and for people to see their children showing up in the way that they know their children do on a daily basis. I think that it'll be a restorative opportunity. And I thank you for looking at all the different options for us to consider.
Thank you. I hope the same. I also think about, because I'm a nerd, I think about the research, and I think about what, the whole deeper learning research movement says about what really matters for students. Like, what is going to be memorable in the time when they leave our district and they leave the high school district and they're in college. They're going to look back, and those are the memories that are going to be part of who they are, part of their identity, part of the things that make them successful in the long term. And having a way to honor and elevate those things, I agree. I think it's really meaningful.
Yeah, and while also keeping us accountable to looking back and looking forward in terms of how we are making the progress that we want to make on standardized assessment metrics. I like the blending of that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm trying to blend it to meet the needs of our community.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think this revamped report will do that nicely. This is a lot of work to undertake, and a lot of change to make. So thank you for your commitment for providing us all of this. Just a couple of things that I wanted to make sure we just really quickly highlight that were in the report. A couple of things that the board has asked for over the years
Yep.
that we're not going to see in the revamped report is one, cohort analysis, because I think as you really nicely explained, that will inadvertently actually drop students off of our reporting that we are most wanting to be able to see how we are doing over time.
Yes, that's true. So thank you for bringing that up. Cohort analysis is a really critically important technique. It's not one that I would necessarily apply in the context of understanding district performance at large. It's a technique that we should be using in specific instances and cases because it would drop out the most marginalized students from the analysis and have a real disproportionate effect on our, the populations of students we need to be attending to most.
I think the other thing that we've asked for over time is being able to further disaggregate the data, for example, when we look at IEPs to look by race or looking at ELLs by race, but understanding that even at a district level, that parsing it out at that level would create sample sizes that are too small and could compromise student confidentiality.
Yes, so I did look at that. I did a lengthy analysis of that, and there are many groups that would not be able to be reported whatsoever if we did the multiple intersections of different student identities. I do think, though, and I will say that I think it's critically important, especially when it comes to our supports for special education students, that we are looking at and analyzing disproportionality and that we are examining our assessment results using a racial lens. And Romy and I are working really closely to develop some work around that area. So while we may not necessarily put that level of multiple identity disaggregation in the district accountability report because it would require us to drop many years worth of data and also drop many, like we wouldn't be able to report data, for example, on families of students who identify as being multiracial, families of students who identify as being Asian, right? And so we'd be excluding a lot of people who are part of our community from our community report. But Romy and I are going to be working really closely on some upcoming analysis that we hope to bring you all in the future. And that is definitely something that we also do look at internally. We have tools in place that are utilized by school leaders, SIT teams, different members of our school community who are able to look at highly confidential, identifiable data and are looking at those intersections of multiple student identities and looking at patterns and trends in that.
Well, thank you. And so we are still on track to get, usually January is when we see this report, and we are.
That's my plan. My plan is January. So I, am going to be working towards that, and we'll come back to, since this is such a lift, I am going to be tapping into my fantastic colleagues who have all committed to helping to support this sea change moment in our achievement and accountability reporting. And I'll be leaning on all of them to help make contributions to this. And so my plan is still January. Should that change, or should we need more time to really reflect our community, I will, of course, let the board know. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Just a quick comment before we move forward. I really appreciate you looking at a more holistic view of children and achievement. And I would really like to, when we think about the recommendations around recognizing educational leadership and accomplishments, as well as principal leadership and school accomplishments, given some of the conversations that we had or in public comment, really, I'd love to see, and I really love that Tulsa report that really highlights, these slices of school life. So what would it look like to have a room that is practicing culturally responsive teaching, right? And maybe have somebody talk about it, or pictures, right? Or what does it look like to have a again, just best practices, right? What is a good, highlighting a teacher who's doing inclusion really well, right? Yeah. So, I think that it's just so exciting, the possibilities that are going to come out of this. So very, very excited.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm excited too.
Board, thank you very much for allowing us to do this tonight, because it's a change of paradigm in our model, which is great.
Right.
But also there's a lot of heavy lifting, and there's momentum built by the cabinet, and that we're all very excited about doing this, so we'd like to move forward with it, and we'll give you progress reports along the way.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We do have the opening of schools enrollment update, and I am again mindful of the time, so I'm going to, I think, one of the things that came up is we know that in the past that Nichols families came to us with issues and questions and concerns about enrollment. I think you've shown a little bit about how that's been addressed. I think it's important that the Nichols community is communicated with, and I understand that there's that's in the works, to working with Mr. Harries to make sure that the Nichols community understands that permissive transfers were limited and how their concerns that they brought forth last spring were addressed. The only other thing, and I don't know if this is something that we want to get into now or if we want to put it on the table, but I think the other question that we had was around the TWE data and why we're still not seeing 50-50. When we had added the 2 additional classrooms at Bessie Rhodes a couple of years ago, it was with the expectation that that would help bring us more in line, but it hasn't quite worked out that way.
Yeah, so I think a couple things on that. When we take a look at the kindergarten numbers that were shared in the opening of schools report, 51.2% of the students that are enrolled in TWE, based on the table provided, are native Spanish speakers. The enrollments do vary a bit school by school, and there are a couple of reasons behind that. One, we had a pretty sizable increase of multilingual learners, I'm going to work on my language now, that enrolled in District 65, both native Spanish speakers and speakers of other languages. So we have a sizable second language population in our kindergarten classes, and that population of native Spanish speakers was larger than expected and larger than the population numbers would have indicated it would have been, looking at our population trends. The 8 sections we still do stand by as being the right number of sections per expansion based on the numbers that we looked at when we did this analysis, which is the 5 years of historical data. There are some cases where, as the enrollment team is looking at numbers, they are trying to think about what is the homeschool for students? How do we keep kids as close to homeschool as possible? And there is no crystal ball. Some applications for native Spanish speakers can come in August, others can come in June, and we were trying to deliver on providing the program of choice for our native Spanish-speaking families. And more families selected TWE for their students that were native Spanish speakers, and we made a decision. We said, are we going to hold the 50-50, or are we going to honor the native Spanish-speaking families' selections up to a point? And at that point, we opted to go up to the 60% if needed in order to honor native Spanish speaker family preferences in the 2-way immersion classrooms, because we had a larger set of native Spanish speakers than expected. And so when I look, the variations, the low is 41.3, but in that particular school, we had 5 students that qualified as TWEX, which means that we had students that were at JEH that, because of their scores on the language screener, they moved from being, considered a second language learner to exiting. So those are students coming from families that are speaking a second language at home. And then the highest percentage of native Spanish speakers that we had was 63.64, and that's a pretty accurate, pretty specific number. We'll call it 64%, and that is at Oakton. And again, that's about trying to keep kids where possible in their home school or in the closest proximity to them.
Okay. So then that might be a discussion about then where we might need to consolidate strands as opposed to adding strands. Is that a fair?
So I do think that there are a couple of things. I would still stand behind our 8 strands. And numbers can change over time, but the analysis we did would say that the 8 strands are right.
I'm sorry, when I meant consolidating in a school, like having multiple strands in a school instead of.
We do really want to move to getting 2 strands at every school, and which would mean consolidating some strands.
Right.
And this is all information, some of the demographic analysis that we have considered and would want to consider, and arriving at where ultimately we would double strands up.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. It is late, and we all, I think, want to get home, so I will adjourn this meeting at 11:01 p.m. Thank you, everybody.